Good evening. Welcome to the Lompoc City Council meeting workshop. And could we have roll call, please?
Council Agency Member Martner. Present. Council Agency Member Costa.
Present.
Council Agency Member Lingle. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Vice Chair Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Chair John Lynn.
Here. Okay, I apologize in advance because I failed to get to Stacy and have her put the invocation on. So, we will now have the invocation, and my good friend Kamlish Desai, alias Doc, is here to give us that.
So I'm going to do an invocation of a Hindu prayer. Basically, I teach Hindu classes in Santa Maria, and this is the opening prayer. I've translated it into English, so it's a little kind of awkward, but we'll go through it. Om. May the Absolute Lord protect us during the deliberations. God, please remove all obstacles in our path. We humbly bow and request this help to accomplish the good deeds you have sent us here to do. May your grace give us strength to complete our tasks and gather our composure to express our concerns humbly and eloquently. Lord, let us remember that you have the divine power to teach us in all matters. Remind us to see your presence in the eyes of our mothers, fathers, relatives, friends, and neighbors. God, you are the source of our wisdom and health. Help me to realize my humility by reminding me that all my achievements have materialized because of your gifts to me. My heart, my mind, my body, my speech, intellect, and love derive their power from your blessings. Lord, please forgive us of any sins of commission or omission, sins of actions using our hands, feet, speech, eyes, or ears, especially in our thoughts. Glory be to you, the ocean of mercy. Glory be to you. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace.
Thank you. If you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Doc. Okay, now we'll have opening oral communications. This section is if you would like to talk to us about something other than the item on the agenda, or you can't stay for it, but I don't think that's going to be very hard since we've only got one. So if you had something you'd like to share with us that doesn't involve our unfinished business today, I invite you to come on down. Going once, going twice, sold. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. Oh yeah, we'll be back to that. Yep, absolutely. Matter of fact, we'll probably have a couple runs at it because it's kind of a wide-ranging subject. Okay, so we have a presentation from our planning manager, Lucille Breeze.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. This is a City Council discussion and direction regarding the schedule, topics, and format of the City Council's review process for the General Plan Update Phase 1. The recommendation is that the City Council consider the proposed meeting schedule and provide direction. The staff report contains discussion of the January 3rd meeting where we were given direction to return with timing and the schedule on how to proceed with the general plan update. And at the January 17th meeting, the mayor handed out a draft schedule for consideration for some additional work to be done, but there was no discussion or direction from the council at that particular meeting. We have provided in this staff report a brief update of where we are with the general plan and the phase 1 update, and discussion of what the general plan is, which is the overall plan, the basic plan for the community, how the city sees itself and the community sees itself over a long-range period. It's a long-range document for the city. The additional ordinance, the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, the architectural review guidelines, these are all implementation measures of the general plan. The brief recap of how the years that we've worked on this plan began in 2007 with the council direction to work with a consultant, and then there have been a series of public meetings both at the Planning Commission and at the council level to work through these projects. The council is returned the general plan at the most recent time to the Planning Commission in 2010, and the Planning Commission during 2011 held a series of meetings and workshops. They've prepared a set of recommendations to the council on the general plan and recommendations on how to proceed. This is for phase one, which is land use, circulation, and housing. Now, the housing element was adopted by the council in 2010. That is the only document that requires review by the state, and that has been accepted by the state. Our housing element is certified and in place. We do have an environmental impact report that was prepared and was adopted for the housing element. Part of the review by the Planning Commission was to look at an addendum for greenhouse gases, which was an item that came to the forefront during our process, and we were required to go back and do some additional studies. So that study was done. There was an amendment to our contract, and that work was completed. As the EIR continues to age, after a certain amount of time, the studies can become dated, and there can become new information in the fields that would require additional work. So we have our land use and circulation elements that have been reviewed by the Planning Commission. As I said, the housing element has been completed. The next phase would be down the path that we had started down, was to update phase two immediately following phase one. And the phase two elements would be a shorter time frame, and there would be a supplemental EIR that would be prepared. In discussing the cost, the work on the general plan, when the contract was awarded, there was $1 million that was put into the budget. The contract that was awarded for RINCON was $907,000. I'm sorry, yeah, 907. And so we have worked with that figure, and we are on budget with $60,000 left of the RINCON contract that will allow us to complete phase two if we continue on the path that we've started on. However, if we are to change paths, which we certainly can do at the direction of the council, once we find and understand the scope of work that the council would be interested in us taking, then we would have to come back with additional work once we really understood the scope. And I've met with the consultant, and it could be, if we change densities, if there's significant changes in land use classifications, if there's significant rewrite to be done in the document, then we could be doing more of a supplement to our EIR. If it's a simple change and it doesn't really affect the analysis that's been done, in the EIR, then it could be something that would be 30,000. So it's hard to give a real number. The numbers are just floating until we find out exactly what the scope of work that we would require. Addressing the zoning ordinance, our current 1974 zoning ordinance is very antiquated and does cause a great deal of concern to everyone. I know our attorneys have concern with it when we work on projects. There are issues that need to be addressed, and it was our hope that once the general plan was completed, we could immediately go into that. The reason for that progression is in the general plan, when you're adopting the goals and the policies, there's implementation measures that are there. Those implementation measures tell you, update the zoning ordinance to include this language, provide for this particular type of development. So what the natural progression should be is to go ahead, do the general plan, then update the zoning ordinance with all of the new language. Then you have two documents that are new and current and up to date for everyone. We know that the zoning consistency has been an issue of concern for the community, for the council, for all of us. And what we have kind of talked about doing is there may be a solution to have the council direct us to come up with language that would allow a South Side residential area specific overlay that would remove the legal nonconforming issue, that would address the uses that are there. We would have to come up with language, and that would require us to go back and notice all of the folks whose property would be affected and have hearings so that they would have the opportunity to discuss their wishes in that way. And then that could be brought back to the council. If we were to look at something like that, I'll get to that in the recommendations, but that would be generally a text amendment that would go forward. And it would be something that, as we know, we can update our general plan 4 times a year. So if we were to adopt the general plan and want to make changes in it, we could do that 4 times a year. It's no difficulty. I did include in the staff report kind of a timeline, just a hypothetical, so that you would see when we're looking at a text amendment, there are certain processes that we have to go through, and those processes include noticing, they include public hearings, they include the hearing at the Planning Commission, then we have to give our notice for the council hearing and move forward. So those do take a while to complete, and I just did a slight hypothetical in there that shows you that it is a couple 3-4 month process to get it completed. And I'd just like to, again, in the staff report, we've noted that in the last budget, we did have a reduction in staff. In the planning staff, we now have 2 professional planners that are working. And we are starting to see our activity pick up. So we have been quite busy, and I've included some of the main projects that we've received recently. If the council is interested in proceeding on a schedule down the path that we have been taking, I've included some language and some proposed dates. Those dates, of course, could be changed, but they're just tentative, put out there for the council to look at. Once the council receives the actions or the recommendations of the Planning Commission, we could certainly make any changes to the document. Alternatively, as an option, there is, if the council would prefer to address the zoning ordinance prior to the general plan update, then the 1997 general plan would remain in effect, and but our housing element, which has been adopted, would remain in effect as well. We also have the option of, going back to the zoning consistency, we could go ahead and change the general plan map in the South Side area to match what is on the zoning map. Again, we would have to go back through hearings because it would be an amendment to the map. We are just wanting to advise the council that there could be additional costs that would be incurred as we go through a process that would be different than what we started out with. And I don't have specific numbers on that right now because until we understand the scope of work, it's difficult to get any kind of definitive number from a consultant or to give you a timeline that's something that we could stick with. As a summary of our recommendations, they would generally be to receive and consider the Planning Commission recommendations for the general plan update. All of the information is available and we could present it to council. Council could then look at it, make any changes that they felt were necessary, and the document could then be approved. Part of that recommendation would be to separate the South Side residential consistency issue and to direct staff to return the matter to the Planning Commission with specific directions on how the council wanted to see that area handled. With that, a text amendment could be prepared. Or the option, of course, is to direct staff to work toward amending the land use map, the general plan map, to be consistent with the zoning map. Either one of those could go forward. If the general plan phase 1 is then adopted, the zoning ordinance, that text amendment for the Southside residential, could be going forward through the Planning Commission and back to council during that time. So it would come back to council very quickly, relatively, considering the process. And another recommendation would be, following adoption of the phase 1, to hold workshops with the City Council and the Planning Commission to look at specific issues of concern regarding portions of the zoning ordinance. The commercial and industrial, there's concerns there. What is the community, what kind of changes do we want to make to it to make it more current? Could invite the chamber, business members, reach out and have a good public participation so that we have an idea of what is really of interest. And the same for the residential districts, to invite real estate brokers, the people that are involved in those particular issues. And then we would, with that information, we would look for a proposal for consultant to update the comprehensive zoning ordinance, to do it in one step. This way, instead of doing a portion of the zoning ordinance, if you do a portion of the zoning ordinance and then go back to the general plan, you may have to rewrite portions of the general plan, and you're not going to be consistent. Your documents are going to be inconsistent. It is an efficient and more economical way, from our point of view, from a more technical point of view, to go forward with the one document and make those changes, and then go forward with the second document. And then we would go forward with phase 2 and look at the public hearings on the zoning ordinance. So that completes my staff report, and I'm available for any questions.
Questions at this time from council? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'd open it to public comment for the first time, and we'll have more than one shot at this. Is there anyone out there that would like to speak to the issue right now? Come on down. Sign in and away we go.
Good evening, all, Consul, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. My name's Robert Schmidtke. I'm new to Lompoc. I've only lived here about 6 years, so I wasn't here for the big plan. However, a bad plan is a bad plan, no matter what it cost, and this may be. Right now, there's considerable talk about downzoning, and it's been pointed out to all of us by the mayor of what has happened. Now, as I look from the little bit experience I had on a planning commission in Hawthorne, this city is mostly set up with the old barrier system. You have commercial along the main drags, and then you have industrial off at one corner of the city. That's worked for some time in this city. Worked rather well. The thing that got my attention initially is I bought some property over on the north side of town. It's a nice little property. It's a nice neighborhood. It's zoned R3, residential 3. And somebody said, well, no, we're going to make that R2. Oh, this is a bad thing. Then I found out through the local realtors that this is happening over hundreds of properties here in town. And I'm sitting here listening to somebody saying, well, the south side, we can do something about that. But nobody said anything about the north side where my investments are. Basically, our economy has changed in this whole nation, not just in Lompoc, but the whole nation. We have a situation where realistic unemployment is more like 20%, and interest rates are never been lower. The government is loaning banks money at practically 0%, and they're loaning it back to us at 6 or 8%. It's a difficult time for all of us in this country and in this community. The mayor came up with a rather good idea on the commercial, the C zoning. You can just permit just darn near anything if you zone it C and allow it on the barrier system. You could and keep your industrial off on the east side of town. That's where the wine ghetto is, and other opportunities to build other things. You could even build, well, at one time they had an opportunity to build helicopters here in town over at the airport. They wanted to put in a facility to do that. That was turned down here, I gather, and they moved to Santa Maria. That's where they're building the helicopters. But to downzone residential would just create a situation where you're going to kill this town. It's been here for a long time, but you can kill it with that sort of thing. It is difficult these times, and they are not going to get easier for any of us. We can't keep going to someone to tell us how to run this community. We're going to have to figure it out ourselves to the best advantage of the people living in this community, whoever they are. We can't keep coming in with outside advisors to tell us. We've got to do it ourselves. It's like the mayor has come up with things. This is the first place I've ever met the mayor is in these meetings, as a matter of fact. But he's right. I mean, he wants to go around and say, well, hey, look, cut your lawn. And then I hear 2 hours of debate on whether you'll hurt their feelings if you tell them to cut the lawn because it makes the whole dang neighborhood look bad. Well, it's going to make the town look real bad if there's nobody living in it. And we've got to increase business, and we've got to increase jobs, and we can't downzone to do that. We must properly zone to do that. And we've got to look at this very closely, and it can't be something to just amend this, amend that, constantly patch things. We've got to come up with something that works, that will work in the long haul and help all the citizens of this community in the long haul. But we cannot downzone our residential properties, especially the multifamily stuff. I don't have time to go into why it's disadvantageous, but it also could be considered a taking if you downzone that stuff. And you don't want to get there. So, at any rate, thank you, and I know this council will act accordingly.
Thank you. Next. Come on, you guys, don't all run up at once. Come on down. I know it's your first time, so all you have to do is say your name and go on from there.
Hi, my name is Rennie Dover. Thank you for allowing me to talk. I'm not quite as eloquent as Mr. Schmidt, I think it was, but we also are very concerned about the downzoning of the properties. We have a piece of property on H Street, and we would like to fix it up and move forward with it with, say, a multiplex property, a tasteful one that fits in with the decor of H Street, but we can't. On one of the zoning maps it says we can, the other zoning map it says we can't. We go to the city of Lompoc and they say no, you can't. So we're stuck with a piece of property that we can't really do anything with, and so I just wanted to get that out. That I think that we're not the only people in that situation. A few weeks ago, I saw an article in the paper where there are several people that have the same issue that we do with their properties. And all we're trying to do is make a nice piece of property for people to live in, and we're not trying to put this 15 or 20 plex up, just a small number of units together that'll fit just tastefully on this piece of property that we own, but we can't do it. So it sits there vacant right now, and we're stuck trying to figure out what are we going to do with this. So I just want to concur with what Mr. Schmidt said. It's painful for us. We're not making money in the property. We're paying whatever taxes we have to pay on it, and it does sit there vacant until we can figure out what to do. And it's been a couple of years now where we've had it sitting there. Now, it hasn't been a couple of years vacant. We have we had a renter in there, but we don't anymore. In trying to figure out, we thought we would have time to figure something to do with the property when we had the tenant in there, but we're still coming back to the same issue. Well, what we want to put in, the city won't let us. I guess what the city wants us to put in doesn't make sense for us to put in, so we just have this piece of property that sits there doing nothing. So I just wanted to at least let you know that, and that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Is there anyone else? Going once? Going twice? John, are you sneaking up? No, he's talking. Okay. Gone. Okay. Since this is my ball, I'm going to start out with it. I have a much shorter speech, so don't everybody panic. It's not the 25-page one. But first, there's about 675 properties that one way or another have a zoning issue and have had since 2005. So here's my story, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this after the staff report came out, and here's my conclusion. So I appreciate the staff's input and perspective, and I've also spoken with the city attorney about his firm's ability and time frame to convert council draft concepts to ordinance text for the Planning Commission. Our contract law firm has staff that specializes in zoning and general plan and language. In line with Joe's recommendation, I've modified the timetable that I gave out 2 weeks ago, and I'll give you a copy of it because he and I talked the first time and I didn't ask enough questions. So the second time I asked a lot more questions, and I think I have a better answer. But that's still something we all need to talk about. So I'm going to present that this evening. Generally, a general plan update is completed and then the zoning ordinance is addressed. And, I agree with that. That's the way it used to work. But we find ourselves at a time when this council must rethink how we regulate business occupancies, and for that matter, residential, to bring jobs to Lompoc. In these economic times, we must streamline the entitlement process. We must make it simple for businesses to find a suitable building and be entitled to open for business quickly, while at the same time protecting the public good. The catchphrase in workshops today is nimble. We must be nimble to bring jobs and businesses to Lompoc. And you guys don't talk to the people that I talk to, but just in the year we've been up here making things be more nimble, it's amazing the number of people that are here talking to us about economic development compared to a year ago. So it's working. In my last either dissertation or soliloquy, whatever you prefer, I talked about many properties, and someone more familiar with the past than I was corrected me on one. The project at the former Grefco site actually started more than 12 years ago. And here's last week's example. If a new car dealer, this was a philosophical question someone asked me because obviously car dealers bring a lot of income to the city, wanted to build in Lompoc, what property is correctly zoned? Of the 4 vacant parcels large enough in Lompoc that aren't industrial, only one is correctly zoned, and it's the smallest. The 2 best possibilities would require a 12 to 18-month process of a specific plan, a zoning map amendment, a general plan land use map amendment with the accompanying full EIR, included in this list is the former car dealership location at Chestnut and A. Well, in this economy, that level of effort is unlikely to happen. So what would someone do? They'd go somewhere else. The Planning Commission has done a good job of bringing forward the general plan update beginning in 2007. Unfortunately, as the other speaker mentioned, the economic realities of 2008, 9, 10, and 11 have changed everything. What worked in the past does not work today. It is a truism today that the streamlining of zones and the expansion of opportunities for businesses to use that one building or that one lot that is best for their business plan will have effects on our completed, now, those changes will have effects on our completed environmental documents. I understand there will be additional costs for the supplemental EIR and its components that must be done. In a general discussion with the city attorney, who is familiar with the various EIR options, at first look, and I emphasize first look because it was just he and I talking about concepts, he said a supplemental EIR would probably be adequate. This is dependent on the quantity of changes that the City Council decides to make. Our current general plan has not been matched to the zoning map since 1997, and those inconsistencies have stopped numerous projects beginning in 2005 when the staff started enforcing it. We must get this right now. So if a supplemental EIR is required to consolidate the various commercial zones, to consolidate and entitle the industrial zones, to return the use and value to the 250-plus residential properties placed in limbo in 1997 but not made public until 2005, and many of them changed hands, and the total number of parcels that have been adversely affected is about 670, my recollection. I didn't pull the file, but that's the number that's in my head. We need to eliminate the mixed-use title that has destroyed the value of those 100-plus properties. We need to restore some or all of the 74 already built industrial properties to industrial from residential because they're valueless and many of them are vacant and can't be reoccupied. We must create that compact urban form that's always talked about by providing an optional residential component in the commercial zone. This component must pencil out for the property owners and the developers, like mixed use simply has not. If you create something and nobody can build it, you wasted your time. We must eliminate the use of overlay zones, which provide yet another set of standards to be read and interpreted. We must correct the miszoning of many other properties, like The old DMV was pointed out to me as a good example on B Street. That property has no use. It is zoned public facility. It should never have been zoned that. The DMV never owned the building. It was a rental. It was a mistake. And there are other properties with similar issues. We should give the property owners and businesses in Lompoc the faith they had in zoning prior to 2005, so they can clearly understand what can be done with each property. And we should provide the best economic development tool for jobs in Lompoc. Then it's time to spend what we need to accomplish these changes. If the supplemental EIR were to be adequate, and again, we don't know that for sure, that would cost about $60,000 and take 4 to 6 months. Fortunately for us, we have 3 funding sources that are dedicated solely to the general plan. We have the $65,000 remaining in the current contract. We have $55,000 in a contingency fund in case it didn't all work out. And in the impact fee account for the general plan update work, we've accumulated another $39,000 over the years. In total, there's about $160,000 if it's needed to do this right. Since the first general plan update meeting on April 19th, 2005, I've been deeply involved in the general plan update for industrial, mixed use, residential, and other properties. I don't really know how many meetings I've been to, but I know it's more than 15, and it's probably less than 20 in the council chambers and in the planning commission. I have literally filled a file cabinet drawer with documents. I have at my own expense purchased more than $1,000 in copies of city documents and twice mailed to property owners warning them of their pending rezonings. I share this with you not as a boast, but so you can understand my depth of understanding of the issue. It was the beginning of a 7-year path that led me to being your mayor. You all know me as a frugal man, but I am absolutely convinced, and I appreciate the staff report, but it hasn't changed my resolve, that we must stop and resolve all the general plan and zoning issues one component at a time, and the money we spend is an investment in the future. It's an investment in the economic vitality and jobs in Lompoc. So how are we going to do this? Well, it's like we've done everything else. This council in 1 year has taken on and conquered many long simmering issues. This is our next major effort, and I am convinced taking it piece by piece is the very best method. We have the funds needed, and our city attorney staff is ready to do the technical work. So on a lighter note, this council has conquered graffiti and gophers, and we can now add the general plan to our completed G list. Yeah, we're going to knock one more G down. And there's still one left, and that's gangs, but that's another subject for another day. And you all know how I feel about that. So, I think the direction that I talked about last meeting is the direction we need to go in. I have a couple of changes. This is a revised meeting schedule or timetable based on my conversations with the city attorney, and I've got copies for the audience. This involves the time frames that would be needed, and it stretches everything out a ways. It doesn't change the end date very much because some of the things came to an end before the end date, and I altered a couple things down at the end because of some time constraints. I realize that this is a commitment on all of our part to go to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 more workshops, counting this one. But my my thought with this is that if we take this one piece at a time, number one, it'll be easier for all of us to understand, and number two, the public will have 3 opportunities on each segment of this to come and talk to us about it and provide input. First, by doing a council first draft review, we will have the opportunity to give the Planning Commission some fairly detailed instructions on how we view this proceeding. So rather than them thrashing around trying to find a solution which they then bring back to us and we don't approve, or we send back to them, which has been the history of this whole process, I think I counted residential, and that's been through 11 meetings without a resolution. Or in some cases with a resolution that was unresolved at the next meeting. Then Joe and his staff have more or less 30 days, which he indicated would be adequate to take our draft consideration and present a finished document to the Planning Commission. This then allows the Planning Commission time to review it, have public hearings, make decisions and make changes, and then finally another 2 weeks expires and it comes back to the council for final review and approval. Hopefully by the time the Planning Commission is done with it, when it comes back to us, it shouldn't need any work other than something that we might catch that wasn't caught before, and the more eyes you have on something, the more likely you are to be successful. So that's the approach that I believe we need to take. The next subject would be zone consolidation, but I'd like to talk about this issue first, and then we'll go on to zone consolidation. Who would like first word? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I hate to call you out on the spot, but we happen to have one of our planning commissioners here. Nick, Mr. Gonzalez, would you be willing to come up and speak as to your opinion in regards to how the Planning Commission could work with this, or if you would approve staff's recommendation? I know that this is for council consideration, but I was just curious what your point of view was on this.
Nicholas Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc, member of the Planning Commission. It's a very ambitious timeline. However, we've received significant amount of public requests from community members to implement these changes. So I think it's a general consensus with most of the planning commissioners that we're ready to take this on. It was discussed and briefly, and I am certain that, as I stated, it's ambitious, but we're willing to put the time forward to go ahead and help this get pushed forward and finally resolve a lot of these issues.
Councilman Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Lynn. I had a short conversation with my planning commissioner, and she doesn't recall that there were specific dates or anything that was discussed during a planning commission meeting. Is that correct?
We've been given several emails that go back to this. Now, whether your particular planning, whether she...
Those are emails. There hasn't been a meeting where the Planning Commission has discussed this.
No, we've discussed that we were going to embark on a very rigorous schedule of trying to do that based on what...
And that was discussed at our Planning Commission meeting?
It was briefly touched upon, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And, you know, I think there's another point here. Realize that what's in front of us is our objective. But don't go away, Nick. I'm going to ask you a question, too. This is not set in stone. I mean, it's like all other large, ambitious things. A date may slip. If one date slips, other than the first meeting, which I would like to keep on schedule, but if, for example, the Planning Commission took on the commercial land use and commercial zones, which is probably the largest, most complex portion of this, and they met on February 29th, and they didn't come to a good decision because there were more things that needed to be talked about, then, you know, they're going to go forward to another meeting. We're not going to throw something forward for sake of a deadline, because at the end of the day, a couple weeks one way or the other isn't going to make a lick of difference. And, you know, I'm sure that, Nick, you understand that because there's a time frame doesn't mean you're going to do less than the best job.
Well, obviously, the fact that we've had several issues that have gone back and forth is an indication that we're willing to spend the time that's necessary to get something done. You'd mentioned that there have been several issues that have gone back and forth, have taken time. So I can't speak for all commissioners, nor do I want to represent that I have any type of unanimous voice here, but simply put that I'm certain that every commissioner would be willing to do their part if this was the decision of the council. So,
okay. Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And thanks for the loan of your planning commissioner.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to applaud you for the amount of work you've put in on this. You mentioned, 7 years worth of work on this. I know I started working on the general plan as a planning commissioner, so several years as a planning commissioner, and now several years as a city council member. I'd certainly like to see this take place before I retire from this position. And you have put a lot of work in it. I want to thank you for that. However, nothing bad yet. It sounds so good, it's hard to believe it's true. You almost sound like a politician. So what I'd like to do, and I'm going to put Ms. Breeze on the spot. I'd just like your opinion on the mayor's schedule. I mean, this kind of puts you on the spot, and hopefully I'm not putting you in a difficult spot, but if you object or you find something wrong with this plan, I'd really like to hear it, and I think the other council members would like to hear it as well. So, do you mind?
Well, I think that we will move forward in whatever direction the council wants us to move forward in. This is an extremely ambitious schedule, and as I noted before, we only have 2 planners, and getting with our regular workload, preparing for the Planning Commission meetings, it would be very, very challenging to attempt to meet this schedule. We do have our general plan, which is ready, and we'd really like to see the council at least consider the Planning Commission recommendations on those. I think that the zoning is an important fact and an issue that definitely does need to be dealt with. It's something that we have asked for in previous budgets as well. We need to modernize our ordinance, and I think that we need to take the time to do it and have some discussion and public participation in that process. What generally happens is you start out with an idea of what you'd like to see, and we do have an existing ordinance. So what you want to do is you don't want to just throw out everything that can work or does work, but you do want to address the needs of the community. And if the council would prefer to move forward with the zoning ordinance and let the general plan stay behind, and we can address it that way. I think trying to do both of them is extremely ambitious at one time.
Okay. So if time and money were not an issue, is the mayor's plan a good plan? Good for the city? Good for the community? Would it address a lot of the issues that I'm sure you've been hearing, that we've been hearing? Would it address these issues and correct them? Again, if time and money were not an issue.
Well, if we make changes to the ordinance, it is going to address some of the issues that have arisen. However, one of your resources that needs to be considered when you are looking at an update of this magnitude is your staffing, and the fact that we certainly can work with the city attorney's office. That would not, we do that on a regular basis. However, even doing those type of updates does take a good amount of time, and it would be something that would have to be worked in to our regular work schedule.
Okay. And I understand staffing is an issue. I mean, you have two professional planners right now. Are there agencies that we could hire temporary staff for you for a period of 6 months? Are those like temp employees? Are there temporary planners out there?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. We, due to the amount of projects, which we are happy to see, that are coming in right now, we were advised and directed at the budget hearings that when the workload became very high, we would be able to work with a contract planner to come in where we could bill those hours to a specific project. And we are currently in the process of working out a contract with a contract planner at this time.
Okay, well, that's good news. You know, the reason I'm asking this, and it's not that time and money is not an issue, because time and money is an issue. Okay. However, this community right now, this city is investing a lot of effort right now in economic development. I believe that an aggressive plan to rectify, change, correct the issues we have, if the mayor's plan would do this, would be money well invested for future growth of this community. So when I say money's, I didn't say money's not an issue, because it is. But aside from that, if we were to invest in this plan, we would be investing, I believe, in economic development. So to address the mayor's plan, several things were mentioned during the speakers, and I wrote them down. A bad plan is a bad plan. Now, it's not that this plan is bad. It just has some bad parts to the plan. So to correct these plans. Everyone talks about downzoning. I really believe that whichever recommendation we go with, we need to address the issue of downzoning so it does not penalize financially our citizens that trusted in this community, this city, when they made their investments. And then the plan, another comment they made, I loved it. It has to be to the best advantage of the people. This is why we're all here, is for the community, or the citizens of this community. So I'm going to turn it over to the other council members right now, but I want to get in there that money is an issue, but if it's a bad plan, if we have some money we can set towards correcting it, I'd be willing to do that. So thank you, Ms. Breeze.
And my apologies to Councilmember Martner.
Oh, no, Councilmember Lingle did have his light on first. So, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions for Ms. Lucille Breeze. First of all, has the Planning Commission discussed this?
What the Planning Commission discussed at previous meetings was when we were working on Phase 1, the Planning Commission was willing to do a second meeting where we would do regular business at the first meeting, and then the second meeting we would work on the general plan. And that is how we proceeded during the summer. We took two separate meetings so that there could be focus on the one meeting, on the one topic, and it made it easier for everyone involved.
So I guess the confusion that I have here is that Commissioner Gonzalez said that the Planning Commission has discussed this, if I understood that that's what the statement was. I want to get an answer. Has the Planning Commission discussed this plan, this approach? Has the Planning Commission discussed the recommendation that the staff has made here in this report?
The staff recommendation, that is the path that the Planning Commission was taking, where they did the review of the general plan, and then it came forward to the council for their review, consideration. Then we were going to start again with the phase 2 elements.
Correct, and that's my understanding has been what the path has been until we have a new proposal on the table.
That's correct.
So, has the Planning Commission discussed what the involvement the Planning Commission will have in this new approach?
This approach, which we first saw on the 17th of January, has not been discussed. We've not had a Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So the Planning Commission has not stated whether they are willing to work with this approach in a public meeting.
No, they have indicated a willingness to do a second meeting.
Correct.
On the original path.
Which was the original path that came all along.
Correct.
So I'd like to have that corrected in the record. The Planning Commission has not discussed this second approach in public and has been basically saying that they will be willing to participate in it. So I think we as the council need to ask the Planning Commission whether they would like to play part in this new approach. We can certainly discuss it here and tell the Planning Commission, well, that's what you should go and do, but we should not say that the Planning Commission is willing to go along with this, because the Planning Commission has not discussed that subject in a Planning Commission meeting, public meeting. So I'd like to set the record straight on that one. The second question that I have is a more general question, which is regarding the two approaches, if I understand them. One of the approach is to go along with the general plan as we have been going along, and in a separate approach, continue to work on the zoning issues, ordinance changes, and so forth. Whereas
typically in a general plan update, you're doing some fine tuning. This general plan update is already very much more complex than what you would normally do. You wouldn't normally be altering the zoning of 650 parcels, which some portions of it already have been done and some of them are being done. And frankly, 95% of that was detrimental to either the opportunity to develop the property or to the property owner's rights. So as an example, mixed use is a good concept because you put the people where the stores are. But when mixed use was done, although the general plan spoke to, how would I say it, the ability to build a building where people could live and shops could exist, and it would pencil out and you could build it. When the zoning ordinance was written, which was done kind of at the same time, it was done in such a way that there's no way you can build a building that pencils out. And I could give you 20 minutes on why it doesn't work, but I hope you'll take my word for it, because I think you've heard the speech before. I know you have. And so we now find ourselves with 100-ish, and I didn't count, parcels that have been rezoned to mixed use where you can't build. And that was bad enough, but then because of the quirks of the lending industry, for some reason there's this giant black cloud hanging over mixed use, as we heard testimony last meeting. But the concept is right. The concept of putting the people where the stores are is right. The fix is that you take away that name that for whatever reason the lending industry doesn't like, and you provide an option in the commercial zone throughout the entire city for the ability to build residential units incremental with commercial. And that's what the overlay that's in the general plan talked about. But it talked about it in the way of another layer, And what I'm saying is we don't need another layer. It can be written into the specific ordinance. And frankly, of the three that we're going to deal with, or the X number of items, this very first one is the very most important. And this is the reason why. And I took you on the tour of Ocean Avenue. So you have some properties that are PCD, some that are C2, some that are commercial office, some that are Old Town commercial, some that are community convenience, and every one of them has a different set of requirements. Well, I'm here to tell you it's Ocean Avenue from one end to the other. And that level of complexity is what just makes you crazy when you're trying to do economic development, because you have someone that wants to do something. They can buy that parcel or they can lease that parcel that's suitable for their use, that isn't going to be an adverse impact on the surrounding area, but they can't do it there. So then you go look for a parcel that's suitable for their use, and you either can't find one or you don't find one that's efficient or as cost effective, and at the end of the day, you can't put them anywhere. And I told you all those stories, and I could tell you 20 more. But that's the problem we have with our commercial zoning is that for reasons that no longer exist, we cut it up into all these little subcategories, and that was okay. That was 1996's reality. It was 2007's reality. It is not today's reality. Today, if I can't say to someone, you have an entitled use, they're not very interested. I've spent half of today working with someone else who's coming to look for a piece of property in Lompoc. And, you know, that was one of the first questions. And, you know, if you can't get it done, and because of various things that we were going to do, properties were rezoned for things that never came to be, and now they're functionally useless. I mean, the old Ford dealership at Chestnut and H is now zoned mixed use. Okay, so let's talk about why that's a problem. Number one, there's still a very low-level toxic spill under that property. So under the California Environmental Quality Act, there's a level of cleanliness that you have for an industrial property or a commercial property that's different than a residential property. Well, they've done mitigation, so the property would be illegal use for the mitigation under commercial or industrial. Obviously, it wouldn't be industrial. But for it to go to residential, there's an unknown number that's probably, depending on whose estimate you like, somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000. Well, that's a big impact on the property. And then it has to have a zoning map change, general plan text amendment, and a general plan map change designation. And those things, you know, in the past there was time and money to do those things. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not that this was badly done. It's not that anybody, well, there were a couple things that I wouldn't have done, but the biggest thing that's driving what I'm trying to say is a complete new reality. And the need to vertically integrate this. So, for instance, with the commercial zones, I have this evening some proposed general plan language for the commercial zones. Okay? And it's designed to mirror the language that I, with help, created for the zoning ordinance, so that they're already consistent. And we don't pass something in the general plan that doesn't turn out to be consistent with what it is that we're trying to do. If we were making little changes, then this wouldn't be the issue, but we're not. We have very large things to do here. We have 670 parcels to go back and reevaluate in view of today's economic reality. And they're in industrial, they're in residential, and they're in commercial. And if we don't do that, and we don't vertically integrate this effort, we will not be as successful as economic development as we could be. And people will continue to come here, not find a place to have their business, and go on down the road. And that's really the crux of it. And I got to tell you, you know, I'm really tight, money-wise. And I spent a lot of time agonizing over this, and I read the staff report 3 times again, trying to talk myself out of this approach. And instead, I went back and modified my approach a little bit to, I think, blend in some of both sides' concerns. I have absolute faith that Joe and his firm can deliver the text language on a timely basis. And I just see this as a way to get people here to deal with the topic they want to deal with, not 25 topics, and vertically integrate the general plan and the zoning ordinance all in one lick so that we're not going back modifying something else later. Because I dang sure don't want to go back and do text amendments. I want to get it right the first time, not the second time. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, that was a long answer. You want a longer answer? Because
No,
I'm not passionate. I'm sorry.
I just wanted someone to address Ms. Martiner's question, and Ms. Martiner, was it addressed to your satisfaction? I mean,
A bit long.
okay, so it was addressed.
I'm sorry.
Okay, because I just have a small point. It had nothing to do with that, so I didn't want to get us away from it. We talked a little bit about the involvement of the Planning Commission, and I don't know, we've got a very tight schedule here, a very aggressive schedule. I doubt if, we may, but I doubt if all 5 of us council members will be able to make every single meeting. I know I have 2 conflicts on mine, and I'm assuming the situation will be similar with the Planning Commission. So is it acceptable to everyone that maybe all 5 planning commissioners are not at every single meeting? Some meetings may only have 4 planning. I know it's ideal to have all 5 planning commissioners, all 5 council members at every meeting, but with this aggressive of a schedule, I think we're kidding ourselves that all 10 of us will be available on these dates. So I just wanted to bring it up and maybe have some discussion on that.
I agree with you. Some of us are going to come in by teleconference. And I know some people will think this is a bizarre statement, but it seems to me that after a while, all 5 of us figure it out and become of the same mind most of the time. And if one council member wasn't going to be here and couldn't teleconference, I have absolute certainty that that council member could deliver their concerns to one of the others of us, and we would speak probably more passionately on behalf of the person that wasn't here than we would for ourselves, because that's just the people we are. And I think the same thing is going to be true of the Planning Commission. Realize that every single thing that's on this list we're going to see twice. And the Planning Commission is going to see it once, and if they can't get it done in one meeting, you know, I'm more than willing to let them move it to another meeting and do it right. Because the very last thing I want to do is get to the end of this and go, I wish we'd done that. You know, that's not what we need to do. And frankly, of this entire list of things that you see in front of you, the one tonight is the big kahuna in terms of conceptual decision. And the one for 2 weeks from tonight is really some philosophical discussion that's pretty narrow. And the one for the 28th, the residential, is a philosophical discussion of how we're going to resolve the 250 downzonings, and if in fact there are some small changes that need to be made in the residential zoning ordinance. And having read them at great length, I found only 2 that I felt needed to be changed, and I'll just share them now. One was the fact that we have a 75-foot front parcel width, which does not accommodate all the parcels in town, so some of them become conditional uses as a result. And the suggestion from someone smarter than I was, it doesn't really matter how many feet are on the front, it's how many square feet are on the parcel, and you need to establish a minimum parcel size so that that's done. And then you need to go establish an exception for the 3 residential parcels that are built in Lompoc on 25-foot lots. And similarly, within the commercial zone, it's not in here because somebody just brought it up to me, there are 3 25-foot wide commercial zoned lots in Lompoc that for all purposes are useless unless you can buddy up with your neighbor. And that's wrong, because they're just sitting there vacant. We need to have a little exception for those three pre-existing non-conforming parcels, and it's not in here, so. Okay. That's my long answer, and you're up.
Thank you, Marilyn. I understand the idea of a new reality, and I say so because in 5 and 10 years from now, there will be another new reality, and things shift and change, and that's the way that city planning works, and I understand that. I do have a few concerns. I think my concern is that a citizen who wanted to follow multiple issues and really was deeply involved in this would possibly be required to attend every single one of these meetings. So 3 meetings for one item, and that's just if they're only interested in that one item. So that's my first concern, is I know this has been drawn out, and I feel like that may just exacerbate the issue. The other thing is that the Planning Commission, as it sits now, are the 5 folks who recommended in October of 2011 General Plan Phase 1 update. So the General Plan Commercial Land Use, General Plan Industrial Land Use, and General Plan Residential Land Use, I can imagine wouldn't really be discussed at length because they already formulated an opinion and a recommendation for council in regards to those 3 items. So that being said, it makes sense for me logically that the general plan would come to us for discussion first, and we'd get that out of the way. However, my planning commissioner happens to be here, and if she would so indulge, I would request her to come up and speak, if that's okay. Because I'm trying to hash this out through my brain as well and figure out what's logical for me. So if I could get your opinion on this as well in regards to the schedule and the timeline and the recommendations.
Good evening, Marilyn and council members. I'm Mary Leach. This is really a difficult thing because, number one, the concerns are very valid. There's a lot of changes in the economy and the makeup of Lompoc, and those changes need to be acted upon. But on the other side of this, we're actually talking about a general plan that was approved in '97, but we began that process in the late '80s, and I was a vice chair of the General Plan Advisory Committee. We put this whole thing together in the early '90s, and you know we're 20 years away from that. It is a different world, it's a different city, and there's no doubt about that. But from my perspective and from my experience, this will not happen in 6 months. This may not happen in a year. What it looks like is happening is the same thing that's happened with the last 2 or 3 councils. We're saying, guess what? What you guys decided back there in early 1990s is no longer applicable, and we want to start over. And so it's gone on and on and on and on through, you know, several different councils, and now here we are, and we still haven't completed our job of approving that general plan from the 90s. So my recommendation is you need to complete that job, you need to do it as fast as possible, and then you need to start the very important work that you're talking about tonight. We have to finalize that 97 general plan. That needs to be completed, and then begin the process of changing the zoning and changing the terminology and changing the concept of what is and isn't commercial. But I think you're opening up a can of worms, and you're suggesting that all of the work that's been done from the previous planning commission and the one that it was sent to before that and the one it was sent to before that be thrown out, and that we start over again. And I just don't think that that's in your best interest, because this won't happen in 6 months. It's definitely going to take probably a year.
Thank you. So that therein lies my concern is This recommendation from the Planning Commission was made just in October 2011, a few months ago. So we finally feel like we're on time and we're taking it in the timely manner. And then to kind of shift at this point, although I understand certain things need to be hashed out, I would be afraid to lose that momentum as far as the general plan issue is concerned. Now, I agree that we do need to go through the commercial, industrial, and residential zone issues. The downzoning is a big problem, and I understand going through that. But I'm just having a hard time, and I'm saying this, I'm giving you an opportunity to try to convince me why you feel that the general plan should be broken up that way instead of taken first before we move on to the zoning. Thank you.
Okay, so let's just have a conversation. We'll ignore all these other guys. Here's my concern. If we pass the general plan as it is, then the very first thing we're going to have to do is go back and fix it. And if you like the concept of a consolidated commercial zone for the sake of economic development, if you believe the reality that I see, then we're going to have to go back and amend the general plan to fix those things. And if you believe, as I do, that we need to look at the industrial zone and there's a finite amount of land within the city, okay? And as we use that land, we don't have it left, and then we're out looking for annexations, which are never a pleasant subject. So if we have a requirement in the industrial zone where you have 20% landscaping and 30% parking, that's not quite right, 10% landscaping and 30% parking, then you have 60% building, okay? And I'm just taking about, this is a philosophical question and I'm struggling with it, so I'm just sharing. Do you need that much landscaping or that much parking in the valuable land that we have? Well, if you look at the old Pactuca or Fagerdala Foam or whatever the new name is now, and you see a parking lot that would look good in a shopping center and vacant land all over, you know that that original parking standard was flawed. And so we could have built half again more building and used the same land. Okay, so how much landscaping, how much parking is enough to provide the aesthetics that the community wants and the parking that the building needs? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just telling you that's a philosophical question with commercial, with industrial. The same thing is true of commercial. How much parking is enough? And that's why parking is on my list for the Planning Commission, not for us. I think that's more technical. There's the 254 residential units. And obviously the stroke of the pen is you change the general plan map to match the housing map. And now we fixed 254 out of 675. But we left the other 400 parcels behind that were either mixed use or industrial or some other use, and almost every one of them came up on the short end of the stick in the process of rezoning. And then we got to go back and amend those. And then, as Ms. Breeze pointed out, if you amend the description of the parcel type, the zoning, I don't know, the general plan land use designation, that's the word I'm looking for, that triggers some other things further up in the general plan. And now we got to amend all those things. And then when you do that, you got to go back and redo the EIR. As sure as we're sitting here, because I had that conversation with the city attorney, and I'm trying to find a way to not have that issue, but there isn't one. If we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to improve our residential density, and we're going to provide more opportunities for property owners to do things to improve our community and provide economic development, then we are surely going to have to do an amendment to the EIR, as sure as we're sitting here. So it doesn't make any sense to me to pass something that you know is wrong, that you have to go back and fix. And, you know, the general plan it's a huge document. There's one book of it and there's 4. And the part that needs to be fixed is just a small percentage of it. the bulk of it is right, and the Planning Commission has reviewed it. You know, the shall-should issues still out there, and the potential annexation areas that we all know are an issue are out there. But the bulk of the problems are in the commercial, industrial, and residential zones, and they involve these inconsistent parcels for decisions that were made in 1996's reality. That's not today's reality. Even if it was still 1996's reality, a third of those parcels have changed hands. And people made decisions based on the zoning map. Because when you came into City Hall, the zoning map was under glass on the counter. The general plan map was nowhere to be seen. Okay, I came to City Hall before I bought a piece of property to verify that what I was going to do on that property was a permitted use. Because if you know anything about conditional uses, you can't finance it. Or pre-existing non-conforming uses, it's very difficult to finance it. And it's easy to get tossed off. So I came here and I looked at that. Guess what? Although the zoning map showed that the parcel that I bought, that I'm still paying for, was suitable for my use, which was the pre-existing use, the general plan map wasn't. And the one thing I can tell you that has just inflamed people is that. And along the way, they've ended up with property that's almost useless in some cases. I mean, you can think of some properties that are pretty much useless. The NO warehouses along Laurel, Mr. Culberson's building, which looks like the poster child for urban blight, he has no use. You can't put anybody in there. It's residential, and it was vacant, so it has no use. I just don't want to go down this road. I want to just stop and fix it. And I'm a little less concerned about if it took another couple of months, and our legacy was that when we left here next year, at the end of this year, those of us that may or may not be reelected, it's done. And we did it right, and we did it the first time. That's my other speech. Sorry. Go ahead. You know, we were talking. Okay. Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm starting to have a big issue with this because there is a lot of contradictions going on. On one hand, we are saying we are going to stop the process that we've been going, even though we just approved it with our own elected nominated commissioners in 2011, and now we're going to go and tell them, no, we don't like that. We're just going to go and make it this because there is 670 properties out there. By the way, how many properties are in Lompoc, and what is the percentage of 670 process that we're going to stop this huge process for 670 properties? That's a small percentage. So it's really starting to sound like a special interest, you know, and that is not how we dictate policies and how we set a general plan. Just because 1, 2, 3, 600 properties are being affected, yes, the problem with those 600 properties has to be fixed, but to stop the whole process that has been going on just to fix those 600 properties, it seems to be not necessarily the right thing, because it's a very small percentage of the whole city's urban planning. The second thing is we want to get it done in less than 6 months, and I agree with Commissioner Leach, it will never happen in 6 months. Now, we all seem to be agreeing if we're missing some council members and if we're missing some commissioners, so be it, okay? We'll just decide with whoever we're here. Well, that is not the correct process either. I mean, there is representative democracy. If we want to be true to this governing board, we have to include everybody that is supposed to be in the governing board. So I would like to have meetings with the council members present and the commissioners present, and not just leave it to the situation that, well, I cannot make it because I have X, Y, or Z. I mean, we're rushing through this to fix 600 properties. to fix the problem with 600 properties. We're rushing through this. I have a problem with this. I want to fix the 600 properties, no question about it. But I want to do it in a way that it is fair to everybody and the whole city is heard in the process. And that includes council members, public hearings, and commissioners being present in their meetings. So, you know, now we're kind of going back to this path, and I feel, Mr. Mayor, I'll be honest, I feel that you are rushing us. You're pushing for your agenda. And, you know, I think we need to step back a little bit and go, okay, we're going to fix the problem, but let's go through the process and fix the problem. And not just set every Tuesday from here on out, you know, for this council to be here and the Planning Commission to be in these other meetings. It just feels that it's being rushed. And I'm sorry, you know, I don't think that's really the right way to be making decisions.
Okay, let me say that on top of those 675 parcels, there's another 300-ish commercial parcels that have the issues where they can't do something when an opportunity comes around. So now you're up around 1,000 parcels, which represents every commercial parcel, every industrial parcel, and 250-ish residential parcels. I'm sure that now comes up to about 20% of all the parcels in Lompoc are impacted by what we do or don't do. So, Councilmember Starbuck, your light's been on for about a week.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a couple of statements on it. When it comes to this, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy. It looks like somebody in the planning, we're going to be working overtime personally. I mean, I'd just soon be aggressive. Let's get it done. We've put 15 years into this, almost $1 million. It still isn't close to being right in my eyes. I'd much rather just, you know, tell me how we can do it, and let's just, not why we can't, you know. The general plan, it's not going to be changed that much. We're fixing far more than, you know, 600 properties. And 3 meetings beats the heck out of 11 or 12 for the same subject. So I'm kind of leaning towards going aggressive on this and getting it done.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. The one thing that I wanted to bring forward as well is I understand the idea of being aggressive, and of course, you know that I'm in agreement with that. However, if in the instance this does take later than the first week of November, essentially what we may have done is kick the can down the road, because 3 of us may not be here. That's the reality that we have to face. So there is a clear deadline to feel like if we get something done, because of course when you have new people coming on, they have to go to figure everything out and go to Sacramento and all these other things that get us to where we are finally now prepared to discuss this. So that's really a fear that I have, is if it takes past November, essentially we may just say again that it's not valid, that it's something we don't agree with, and continue down this process. So that's a huge concern of mine. And if I would say if we do follow this agenda as set by Mayor Lynn, I don't see how we could expect the planning department to do it with current staff. I think Councilmember brought that up. Councilmember Lingo, is that right? You talked about the contract of an additional planner. I think that would be absolutely necessary in this case. So just to think about. I mean, that's a concern.
No, I agree completely. You know, there's going to have to be some additional planning help, and the city attorney's office is going to coordinate with them. But if you look at the list, I put all the really hard things at the top, because those are the ones that if the can gets kicked down the road a little longer, we'll be working on the other ones. And the ones further down are what I perceive to be the simpler ones. The annexation considerations are a council decision. The Planning Commission had no recommendation, so that's come to us. And the things that are assigned to the Planning Commission further down, which would just be the architectural guideline update and the parking and sign ordinance update, are really very small. They're what I would consider fine-tuning, because from what my planning commissioner tells me, and we've talked about this at great length, And those things need 5% fix. They don't need 50% fix, if that makes sense. And so I really tried to structure this so we got the three that have a great deal of work at the front of the bus, and if they slip a little bit, it's not going to affect the things down the line too much. And I would just say with the general plan process that we have gone through has been driven by the way the snowball started rolling in, what did I tell you, April of 2005. That's when the snowball started rolling. And despite the fact that literally hundreds and hundreds of citizens have come in and sent letters and said, no, this isn't right, the snowball just kept going. And we never stopped and fixed it. And that's why we're in this spot we're in today, because we didn't stop and fix things. The snowball kept going down the same path. And, you know, it would run partway through the process, and the people would rise up in righteous anger, and the council would kick the can back to the planning commission, and the planning commission would fiddle with it, and it would come back to the council. You know, when I told you that the residential ones went through 11 meetings, I was at every one of those meetings. And we never solved anything because we didn't stop. And, you know, thank goodness for Councilmember Lingle and Councilmember Martner. I mean, they're the ones that stopped that can from being kicked down the road and those people losing their property values. They made the votes that made it happen. I don't remember who the third vote was, but you guys got it done. We wouldn't even be talking about it. We'd be talking about trying to undo that mess, along with trying to undo the 75 industrial parcels and the 100 and some mixed use and all those other parcels, you know. But that can was stopped. We just need to stop and fix these things and quit doing the same thing over and over, because we've been trying to pass the same general plan without fixing the problems since 2006. Soapbox over, sorry.
Thank you, Marilyn. Really quickly, can you restate what you and your commissioner spoke about?
My commissioner and I, actually more him than I, wrote this draft document about how to, matter of fact, his idea is the quote, commercial success zone. That's his little catchphrase. And our goal there was to look at all the commercial zones, bring the best of each of them together, and then go back and look. Ron's been on the commission for a very long time, and I know the town really, really well. And most specifically, I know the problems of individual parcels that have gotten tied up in what didn't work. So for instance, there was a section in here where it dealt with parcels up to 5,000 square feet. Well, I know that there's a parcel in Lompoc that's a 6,000 square foot building, and it's completely screwed up because the current zone says 5,000 and it was built long before that. It's 5,500. So there's no difference between 5,000 and 6,000, except we take a building that's now completely useless and we put it back. And to Councilmember Martner's point, yeah, that's to a certain extent, that's a special, I don't know, favor, if you will. But on the other hand, to take that person's building when it was converted from C2 to mixed use and make it completely useless isn't right either. When you take a $1.6 million building and you turn it into something that's worth $400,000, you can't possibly feel good about it. And if you look at the square footage size in permitted in the commercial success zone, it's 75,000 feet. And the reason it's 75,000 feet is that covers all the buildings that are in Lompoc today. And if you look at the conditionally permitted, that goes to 150,000 feet, and that's what's fairly typically used in other cities. And then if you go to the prohibited use, it spaces over 150,000 feet, and that's fairly typical so that you don't have superstores that you can't possibly provide fire service to. And we've talked about that. And so there's all these things in here. And when I went through, we were talking about the current zoning ordinance. You know, it talks about furriers and art studios and haberdasheries. None of that's current anymore. What this talks about is business and professional offices and service businesses with or without the sale of goods, restaurants, bakeries, and other producers of food up to a certain number of square feet, and then as conditional uses, larger facilities because they have impacts, and so on down the list. And it was a really hard thinking process to try to look at what's in the city and craft a zoning ordinance that allows for the uses that exist that are non-detrimental, and I don't think we have a lot, we don't have a lead smelter that we're trying to get out of town. So to make the properties as useful as possible while at the same time, and I emphasize this, protecting the public from those evil things, whatever they may be. And so here's an example. You have an existing building, right? And you want to put a new facade on it. That requires a conditional permit because that's what the public sees. You can't just go do that. You want to change the square footage of the building. That impacts parking and other things. You can't just go do that. You have to come and get a conditional use permit to do that. So the public is protected. But if you're going to use that building for one of these permitted uses, you don't have to jump through any hoops. You can just get a business license, get your fire inspection, and open up. And that's the goal, to stop bad things and make the good things easy to get done and make the questionable things go through the conditionally permitted process so that the necessary conditions are attached. Sorry, another soliloquy.
Marilyn,
no passion.
Although I do appreciate your passion for this topic, I wish you would save these for the discussion of that actual topic.
Sorry.
Because I think right now we are discussing something a little bit different.
Okay.
And what I would like to state is although your commissioner may have done that with you, and I think that this looks great, and I think it's something that we will discuss, all five of us received an email from Mr. Fink that he supports staff's recommendation.
Yes, he does.
So in two commissioners' opinions we have presently that this can still be done after we take on finishing up the general plan and closing that chapter that should have been closed years and years and years ago. So do you understand my struggle in just getting that done, closing that, and then starting, which I know it's going to be elbow deep, and I know that there's going to be a lot, and I guarantee we're going to hear a lot more from you in regards to the zoning, and I know that that'll come, but that is my struggle in thinking that the general plan should be taken care of first.
Well, I'm back to where I was. I don't want to close it and then have to go back and start amending it, because that doesn't make any sense to me. We've got it in front of us. We can fix those things that need to be fixed, and we can do it at the same time we're writing the zoning ordinances so that we know we get both halves to be consistent. And what's happened, I mean, if you take the mixed use zoning ordinance and the mixed use in the general plan, they're not consistent, and yet they've been done in this process because the council didn't look at the general plan and they approved a mixed-use zoning ordinance, and they aren't consistent. And that's the road that we went down. So by taking it piece by piece and looking at both halves and making sure that everything fits together, that's how we avoid that. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Ms. Breeze, is there any way for you to address that concern presented by Marilyn in regards to having to amend the general plan after we approved it if we took zoning after the general plan update?
Well, as I noted, we can amend the general plan 4 times a year. If there are changes at any time that the council wants to see in the general plan, we can go forth with those changes. It just requires us to receive direction on how the council wishes to proceed.
We can amend it as many times as we want, but why not just fix it before we pass it so we don't have to amend it? Break time. The note comes from the right. Go ahead and ask your question first. Then we'll go to
No,
break.
the reason that I say so is because I want to word this correctly with the way that I'm understanding this, because I hope the audience understands that this, for me, is the most foreign topic of them all. So I don't have 7 years into it, so you're going to have to respect that. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely.
Because we need that general basis that has been opened up for so long to get out of the way. As we go through the zoning and figure out what we're doing with the zoning, we then can decide what in the general plan needs to be amended. So do you understand why you would be able to do that after the general plan is updated? And then we have a completed document where we can reference what exactly needs to be amended, send those off all at once, and do an amendment after that.
I understand. And the only thing that I can tell you is, after all these years of being hip deep in this thing, it is not the way I would choose to approach it. And I don't think there's any possible way I can share 7 years worth of meetings and input and listening to public testimony and in any reasonable time period. And so that's kind of where it's at. How about a break? It's time for a break. We'll take 10.
Joe, this is the quietest you've been at a meeting.
beside partner, it's my day. Bend an ear and listen to my version.
Okay, come on in and find a seat.
Of a really solid Tennessee excursion. Pardon me, boy, is that the Chattanooga choo-choo? Yes, yes, track 29. Boy, you can give me a shine.
Based on. Okay. Councilmember Costa, this is for you. Okay. In 2006, there was a process. And the process was that we're going to go through this step and this step and this step and this step and this step, and we were going to get a general plan update. Except the public came in, and they didn't want to have they didn't want things to happen to their property that were proposed. So we backed up a step. And then the decision was made by whoever at the time that what I would perceive was divide and conquer. Okay? So the first one that came up was the industrial zone and the new industrial zone zoning ordinance. So what I'm proposing here is anything really new and radical, because it was done then. And those of us with industrial properties, that would include me, came in and said no, because the proposal was that each and every use in an industrial property that was not the same as the prior use, and the property had not been vacant for more than 180 days, would require a conditional use permit. Okay? And since in the industrial world it's very unusual to get someone making widgets and someone else who comes in to make widgets when they move out, you might have a cabinet shop followed by a winery followed by a stereo shop. We all came in and said, you know, this is bad. We will never rent a building if somebody has to wait 180 days to find out if they can move in. And I'd like to say that I had some positive effect on that, but there were people with a lot more money and a lot more influence than John H. And that zoning ordinance was amended, which was an attempt to make the industrial zoning ordinance consistent with the general plan, and that part of it was deleted. And most of everything else that was going to go forward was deleted. Next, there was a discussion somewhere along the way about the business park and the fact that we had had land for business park zoned since 1976 on Central Avenue. And back then, most of the wineries hadn't been built there. And so it occurred to someone that probably the business park ordinance that we had didn't work very well. And again, if you look at Pactuco that was built under that business park ordinance, it's fairly obvious why. You couldn't get up building on the land to make it pay. And business park was radically changed and made industrial's stepbrother. Okay? Next, there was the mixed use zone. Okay? It was in the general plan. It was on the general plan land use map, but it didn't exist in the zoning ordinance. There was no mixed use zone. So, same approach I'm talking about here. The council took up a mixed use zoning ordinance and passed it that was not consistent with the general plan for reasons I can't guess about, but it wasn't. And those properties now had a new zone and a new zoning ordinance. Okay? And then, as part of the general plan, a overlay was created to bring mixed use, if you will, to H and Ocean. And that was in effect a zoning ordinance because that overlay added mixed use to H and Ocean. So it's not that I'm taking us down a path we haven't gone down before, because we have. We've gone down it on the industrial parcels. We've gone down it on the mixed-use parcels. We've gone down it on the overlay. You know, we've done this before. It's not a new concept. What we haven't done before is we haven't stopped and fixed the problems on each one of these. And I'm only slightly passionate about the fact that I want to stop and fix each problem. And the easiest way to do that is at the same time to look at the zoning ordinance and the general plan language, because the goal is for those two to match. And if they don't match, it's just a future problem. And if we pass this general plan, then we'll be amending the commercial zones, and we'll be amending the industrial zones, and I assume we'll fix the residential along the way, and then we'll have to amend the mixed use, and we'll have to amend the industrial parcels that were downzoned. And I just want to get it in one lick. So I know that this leaves you with many questions. I'm sorry I'm not as good at answering them as I should be. I would simply ask you to take a leap of faith and trust for all the time and all the meetings I've been through with this. No, everyone is not going to agree with me. And on that note, I will move my zoning ordinance and general plan timeline if someone would care to make a second. I'm moving this with the understanding that this is a guideline. It's not set in cement. We're going to work our way through in a basis, but we're going to approach these subjects together, the general plan component and the zoning component for each item. Councilmember Lingle.
I'll second.
And now discussion. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I wanted to bring forth an issue that I'm having for this evening's meeting. You have council's first draft review as this evening, but I don't see it technically on the agenda. Now, legally, are we still allowed to discuss that under the item listed under unfinished business?
Well, the title of the discussion is for schedule, topics, and format of the City Council's review. So this is that could fall under the issue of topic of the City Council's review because it's one of the topics to be reviewed.
Councilmember Costa, do you have a concern about? I mean, I'm willing to kick the can. If you have a concern that people haven't been adequately notified, or if you didn't review for this tonight. That's less important for me than starting down the road and we can kick everything 2 weeks and life would just go on, and I'm fine with that.
It's not that I didn't prepare, but we don't have a staff report specifically about commercial land use in the general plan or commercial zoning ordinances, so I don't think that we're adequately prepared for that discussion tonight. And also, I do think that there was some confusion in the public because they asked if we would be discussing the issues or actually just the scheduling. Talking about the topics but not actually delving into the topics. I guess there was some confusion there. And I then presented the incorrect information if we will start that discussion this evening. Now that said, I'm still struggling with the fact that we are not finishing the general plan that is still outstanding. I understand that it's going to need to be amended, but I think that if you have that to reference to, as far as the zoning is concerned, then you'll know what to change in the general plan to make it consistent. I don't think that doing those two simultaneously is going to make this any more efficient or effective than doing that first. And I would like the public, if they, I mean, they've been sitting here, if they have anything to say, I would appreciate public comment as well.
Absolutely. Anyone like to speak on this now? Come on down. I'll give you a second bite because it's a different apple.
Well, good evening, honorable council people. One more time. I'm Robert Schmidtke, still a resident of Lompoc. First of all, we can't govern by why not. We can't find ways of not doing something and get anything done. I had plenty of notice. This has been talked about over the last several council meetings that I've attended. And now all you're talking about is saying, okay, let's talk about this at these meetings at this time, which is what I understood this agenda said tonight, but maybe I misunderstood that. Did the Planning Commission discuss this? The mayor's report, the staff report? Let's get this going. When I was in the Air Force, they had a saying, the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer. You know, we must do this. I mean, to survive in the business world, in the community, what is it? We adapt. You know, we overcome. That's what we do. And unless we start doing that, we've got to stop, council people, looking at reasons why not. We must find ways to do this. And one of the why nots is to question the question. I took a debate class in junior college, and that's what I see. I've dealt with things like this. I hear questions being asked, but you didn't give me the answer I wanted. But what did you mean by that? What does no mean? Ladies and gentlemen, as a citizen here, I want to hear this discussed. I want to see this go through. I want to see the general plan taken care of with the minor tweaks that it needs that the mayor has discussed, because I haven't read the general plan. But I know darn well he has, and some of the other council people have. They've read the whole thing. They've assured us of that. So let's get this moving down the road and do something for the future of this community instead of just finding reasons why not. Thank you.
Anyone else?
George Bedford, Lompoc City advocate. I was sitting out there and listening to the banter back and forth, and there was some question about, well, has the Planning Commission discussed this? Well, I was in here 2 weeks ago, and it didn't seem to matter whether the Planning Commission had discussed it or not. You overrode the Planning Commission. So I think that can be thrown out the window as far as that. Plus, all the commissioners sit there at your whim. Okay, they weren't elected, they were appointed. All 5 of you had tossed coins and decided who you're going to help get this person appointed to the Planning Commission. So that's not an issue. I was telling John at the break that one of the things about the 6-month deal was he should have made it 4, and then I found out he couldn't legally make it 4. But if you don't set harsh goals, nothing gets accomplished. And you guys are right. 3 of you are up for re-election. You have to get things going quickly. I had one little pet project that the mayor has yet to get done. I think it's going to be a good thing for the city, but I won't bring it up publicly right now. But he needs to get off his butt and get it done. I mean, each of you only really have 2 years to get things accomplished, because every 2 years you're sitting next to someone else who is different, possibly. Hopefully, this council overall, I think, has done a great job for the city in the time that you've been up here as 5. You always need someone who's a beginner, okay? That point, and it's somebody different each time. When I was sitting up there, I was on the wrong end of a 4-to-1 vote, more than I care to realize. Actually caused a little heart attack on me, because I thought all of you are up there to perform the business of the city. Well, the business of the city, I think John's done a lot of work on this. You guys are going to vote your conscience, but overall I think it's a good plan. But this thing needs to get done. So, and all of you need to move forward and make sure it happens. You know, we can talk about, I'm going to be out of town, the commissioner's going to be out of town. That's why there's 5 of you. And sometimes it's better that one of you is out of town. So on both dioceses, I mean, this stuff needs to get done for the betterment of the city. And yeah, things have changed, but the more they seem to change, the more they seem to stay the same. And we can't do that right now. This city's struggling. Businesses in this town are struggling. I'm fortunate But a lot of businesses aren't as fortunate as I am. They need your help, residences need your help, and the city needs the blight cleaned up. So just vote your conscience, but vote. I mean, this nagging, bouncing back and forth, it's like watching a ping pong match. Just, if you got something to say it, and then shut up. Move on, take a vote. Thank you.
George, I wish you were more clear about what you had in mind. Next, please.
I need a favor too, John. Just a few comments. Maybe a suggestion might be, the staff has already done all the work on finalizing the general plan. And so there's not a whole lot of staff time involved in that completion. If you could finalize it one way or the other, yes, no, whatever, they could then begin the process of what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, in an order of most importance. So I think the first thing I'd recommend is that you take the items on this list, which there isn't any controversy about, which there isn't going to be a lot of time involved, maybe the shall and should, and dispense with those at your next meeting. Get that off the list. That's going to cut down your time for all of these items that we're going to need in the future. So let's dispense with those non-controversial issues, and then you can begin, the staff can begin in earnest the work on those items that you think are most needy. And I would put them in I would prioritize them, and then begin the process that way. I still am adamant that you need to close out that 97 general plan. I mean, you just need to close it out, get it over with, and let's start the work of building a more modern, general plan and zoning ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Gone. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. What I want to state is that I don't think there's any discrepancy in the ultimate goal that we're talking about here. So let that be no confusion. I think the confusion here is the manner in which we're doing it. And although I respect Mayor Lynn and the experience he has, what I have to say is my appointed commissioner, Ms. Leach, has more experience in this, and I take her advice heavily to heart. And the last thing I want to mention is, although this may seem like a ping-pong game of sorts, for me, the discussion is part of healthy democracy. So I enjoy this discussion. This is what I'm here for, is because this is what I like to do. So that being said, I'm going to oppose the motion on the floor. Thank you.
I happen to agree with ping-pong. Councilman Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think everybody up here wants to do the right thing and fix the problem. There is no question about that. And you may want to call names to say this or that, but everybody up here in this council wants to fix the inconsistencies that are in this plan. And I think the staff wants to do it because it has caused a lot of problems, a lot of heartaches, and a lot of heartburn, and a lot of wasted tax dollars. And the wasted tax dollars have come about with endless meetings with no resolutions, because people up here that want to get reelected get pushed one way and then they get pushed the other way. Okay? And I think it's not about being reelected. I don't think the three people up here are coming up for reelection. I can tell you right now, I'm not coming up for reelection. So it's not about that. Okay? It is about doing the right thing. And the right thing is to hear all sides at all times, because we live in a democracy. We really do live in a democracy. And even though you may be a minority, you deserve and should be heard. So, as I said before, I feel that we are absolutely rushing through this as fast as we can because we want those favors. And that's what we're trying to do. So I am going to oppose the motion on those grounds. I want to fix the problem, and I think the process by which we have gone through, and I believe with Commissioner Leach, that I might as well get that general plan out of the way and then start fixing these problems. And that's how I'm going to vote.
Well, I agree with 100% of what you said, except one thing, and that's that my goal here is not to do personal favors. I think my goal is to fix problems for specific properties because we have some very unusual properties in Lompoc. And if you own that 25-foot parcel in downtown and you can't build anything on it, you have a long-term problem that we need to fix, because when that was bought, there was some use, but somewhere along the way, a parcel size changed and there's no use. And it's very unlikely that the next door neighbor is going to tear down his building and build a bigger one. So please don't misunderstand my rather wide-reaching knowledge of parcels in Lompoc from driving a tow truck for a really long time and going to all these places, and having been talked to over the multiple years of this is me kind of trying to cut somebody a favor, because that's not what it is. It's me trying to fix problems and make it go away. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a very quick little statement here. My personal experience with the city on a business level has been anything but great. In '99, I had an opportunity to purchase some property at a very, very favorable rate. The thing that was very unfortunate about it is when I went to the city and looked at the zoning on it, if I wanted to be a furrier, a tire distributor, or a gas station on a back street on a secondary overlay of our old town, that was all that was allowed. The property remained empty until just a few years ago, where it became a government piece of property now, doesn't contribute to the tax rolls. And the whole process for me was about 7 months of total irritation and failure in the system. So I'm going to vote to just get this fixed.
Okay. Well, I think we've all talked about it a lot. Let's just vote and make a decision.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, could I just add one little bit of discussion?
Sure. Hit clear, Stacy.
Just wanted to share that, as you've all stated here, we do want to move forward with this. The general plan updated is a priority, and fixing the concerns that you have shared with us and the community has shared with us is a priority. Our job also is to share with you all of the facts surrounding the impacts of the processes that we take and the direction that we follow from you. So we have prepared our staff report with that in mind today and shared with you those impacts, and I think you've done a good job of discussing the additional time and costs that would be associated with any potential changes, and just want to let you know that however you move forward with the recommendation, if it is a completely different schedule, we would like to come back with you, to you with information about what that entails more specifically.
Thank you. Okay, back to the vote. And that passes 3-2. Okay. I want to take just a little time to kind of talk about the next subject, and I don't want to make a decision because I hear what Councilmember Martin is saying, and I didn't look clearly at the agenda, so bad on the mayor. Yeah. But I want to have, now I'd like to have just a general discussion of the concept of 2 commercial success zones. And if you hate the name, I'm okay with that. I thought it was kind of catchy. But I want to talk about the philosophical discussion of combining these, and then we can have a little discussion of that, and then we can take it all home and do some more thinking about it and get it appropriately agendized for the meeting of the 14th. And basically everything on this sheet's going to rotate down one line. So if you took the left-hand column and kicked it down one line, the meeting of the 31st, if you kicked all the titles down one line, that's where they would end up. And to Planning Commissioner Leach, mental blank, sorry, long day. I will put a little more thought into perhaps trying to work some of those things further up on the list. Frankly, my goal was to take on the mean things first and then work our way down to the easy ones, but I see your point of maybe mixing them up a little, so I'll see what I can do with regard to that. So philosophically, the idea behind the commercial success zone, which is somewhere here, and I'll share this prop with everybody up here, and then we'll hang it out for the audience. And I'm not saying this is the finished work, but if we could just digress from our microphones a moment, and I'll come to the center so we can kind of look at it. If you guys want to come over. This is a zone that encompasses all of the commercial properties in Lompoc that are described in my long-term discussion. It includes the PCD, the C2, commercial office, the Old Town commercial, and the mixed use. And what it basically ends up as, for those of you at home, is the H Street corridor and the Ocean Avenue corridor, and in the area of downtown, the 100 block north and south along that corridor. I'm going to take that out there. And that is the area, excluding the mixed use zone, that was largely designated for the residential overlay. The idea, and I think I won't go into great depth because I think by now everybody's tired of hearing me, but the difficulty that we've had in economic development is that we have a property with a building that's ideal for a use, or we have a vacant parcel that's ideal for somebody to build what they want because it's the right size and the right place and so on, but it's not zoned for what they want to do because the zones are just a little bit different. And from my perspective, Old Town Commercial is the perfect example of how this didn't work out. We passed that in, I think, 1984, and as I mentioned before, we've torn down more buildings than we built. And so the zoning ordinance, because of the restrictions that were different from C2, which is the kind of the mother of all commercial zones, made it very difficult for someone to do something there. And I think Commissioner Gonzalez testified that in 1980-something, he and his wife tried to buy half the Ruskowski building for real estate office, and they could afford it, and it was available, but you couldn't put an office on the ground floor in downtown. And so we all know what process that went through. And by the way, on a peripheral note, Lovark acquired the deed in lieu for those buildings today. So I'll share that with you. Yeah, now they're going to fix it. Actually, they are. They're having a meeting sometime this week with the architect, the engineer, and their builder to start looking at what it is that they need to do. And that just occurred to me while I was sitting here. And then I have to tell you that when mixed use came along, I wasn't much of a believer. And frankly, I thought it was a really bad idea. Someone who's sitting in the back row on the far side convinced me that it was a better idea and I should actually look a little harder at it. And so, Joyce, thank you. I looked a lot harder at it, and at the end of the day, it made better sense, which is why you see me proposing what I'm proposing. But it fell short because of the requirements within the zone that didn't allow you to build anything that would pencil out. I mean, if you can't make money on a building you're going to build, no one's going to build it. And they haven't built it in mixed use in 4 years, or they won't build it in the next 40. And so that needs to be addressed in terms of what pencils out. And frankly, what I put in here is just some really, really basic language, and maybe by next meeting I'll have more time to sit and think about that. Because whatever it is that we create, if we actually want mixed use, it has to pencil out. And we have some good people in the community that are knowledgeable about this, and that Teresa has on her Economic Development Committee now that would be a good resource to helping us determine how to make that pencil out so we can truly build it. So people can live next to where they work, or at least next to where they shop. And you can have that more intense, vibrant community. And then the community office zone, when the the rezoning occurred, there were a number of people whose parcels were rezoned from C2 to commercial office. And they were absolutely furious because the possible uses of their zone basically evaporated, and they ended up with buildings that they couldn't do things with. And, they improvised and adapted and overcame and rented them for less. But we also have a number of undeveloped parcels, particularly on Ocean Avenue, that are zoned commercial office. So back to an earlier conversation, the parcel across from Home Depot is zoned commercial office. Okay? Twice in the history of the city, a project has come in before any of us were seated here, unless maybe one of them was when Bob was on the Planning Commission, but I think it was before that. 2 residential projects have been brought in. Both were rejected as not a suitable project for our city gate. In one of them, there was such a large architect's bill, and when it was said and done, the architect ended up with the property because he couldn't get paid. Okay. They were approved? I take it back. However, it didn't work out. The architect now owns the property. That I am certain of. So that, yeah, I know. I made a mistake. I do that every now and again. That parcel, I don't know if you want to see apartments built there, but I'm not sure that's what I want to see built there. But I at least want to give them an opportunity to build something else, and now they don't have that opportunity. Then the last one is community convenience, and from my perspective, the idea behind community convenience is the little black boxes over on that map, which are the shopping centers that are located off the main drag. So Laurel and O, V, off of Ocean, North Avenue. But again, we need to expand what can be done in those shopping centers. Right now they're all full. Life is good, but that hasn't been the case in the past. And then there's the philosophical question of whether you want to include mixed use in those centers or not. And I can go either way on that. So that's kind of the idea behind this, to create a single zone where you can go anywhere within the city and know what you're entitled to do, and then have the zone where you have conditional uses, which are those uses that may have an adverse impact on the public and need to be conditioned. And then the last section are those things that we simply don't want to have in our city. And that's kind of what it's all about. So there's my soapbox for that. And I also have to pass out. It's just the commercial zone, yeah, first round. I also have to pass out the general plan text amendments dealing with the 2 commercial zones. And again, this is just to make the general plan language consistent with what I've written. And I'm not saying this is the finished product, but right now the 2 equal each other, so that as we go along and work on this, we can each look at it and go, yep, this is consistent, or nope, this is not consistent. And anything that's a deletion is struck out, and anything that I added is in green. So that's the original language from the general plan, and then the corrections that were required in my reading, to make what Ron and I wrote for the general plan, or for the zoning ordinance, consistent with the two general plans. And you'll note that what's in the general plan is fairly brief, and I didn't have to go very wide from what was already there. So that's kind of the format that I intend to take with each segment, is to bring in some information, provide the council with both halves, which would be the general plan language and the zoning ordinance language, so that we can talk about those things and talk about what's important to the community and what restrictions do we need to have to protect the community on one side of the house, and what can we let loose on the other side so that we're not putting restrictions down that we don't need. Okay, and my last handout, which my wife brought. Who's got the pile my wife brought? There we go. Okay, this is actually the next step down the road, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it out so everybody can have it and start thinking about it. These are the two industrial zones. There's no changes here. This is exactly as it currently is in our zoning ordinance. And this is the philosophical discussion that you guys have to have with yourself and people in the community. What do we need to provide protection for the public good versus burning up land that we don't want to burn up? So I'm passing this out because theoretically we were going to do it next meeting, but we're not. It's now going to be the meeting after, but now I don't have to carry it around. Yeah, I'm just getting it off my desk. And to my wife who's watching at home, thank you for printing and collating this for me since I was behind. Okay. Well, I'm sorry we didn't have a 5-0 vote, but I know we will all work together to get the best things done. The one that's attached to the staff report is completely wrong.
Correct. Mayor Lynn, our Assistant City Administrator did mention that staff would come back with a schedule. That was that final statement that you made. Is that correct? Or
yes, a request to take all this information in and come back to you with the impacts.
Yes.
Okay, understanding that it may not be these exact dates.
Correct.
Okay.
We're going to do our best to move as promptly as we can,
Agreed.
but still do a good job. We're not going to rush and do it wrong. And if we get to October, if we meet every week or twice a week, and that's what it takes to finish it, then I'm more than willing to do it. Because I agree with Councilmember Martiner, we want to be finished. And if we have to meet too often, I'll bring the sandwiches. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question? Mm-hmm. I'm going to characterize it as a procedural question. I think that's how it would fall in. Having been at 2 or 3 meetings now where this has been discussed, and seeing the product that you prepare, and then the understanding as I'm trying to understand what the next step would be, when is it in this process that I guess this is a question to the council, is the council anticipating getting professional staff input on the suggestions that are being made by the mayor? Because I'm not sure I understand where that fits into this process.
Good question. I think we would have some staff input, realizing that what I'm bringing is a draft concept and that the council needs to determine whether they like that concept and want to move forward with that concept or amend it. And my intention, and I thought I was clearer, but my intention is for the council in a general sense to discuss how we want it done and then give it to you, right, in that general sense, so that you can write a document and the Planning Commission can take it and do that I.T. cross that they're so good at.
I wasn't asking a Scribner question. I can take items that are being discussed and given direction saying, this is what we want to see, put it in words that do what we want to do. That's not what I was asking.
Okay, I'm
sorry. I was asking, I'm assuming, and maybe that's an appropriate assumption, I'm assuming that you want your professional planning and community development, economic development staff to give you input on the suggestions that you're making. And what I'm saying is, I'm not sure I understand, if you do want to have that, where that fits into this process. That's all I'm asking.
I would think that that would be, in a general sense, there would be a discussion when the item first comes to us, and frankly, this first one is the one that has all the questions and differences in it, so this is the one that's going to take a little more. The industrial one is really a pretty basic philosophical combination of two ordinances, and I think that rests more with all of us up here. What are we comfortable with in terms of, how much landscaping do you need? Because the two ordinances are almost identical now. The one thing that comes up repeatedly is that a wine tasting room is a conditional use, and they're always approved. So then the philosophical question you have to ask is, if it's a conditional use and it's always approved, then why is it a conditional use? Why isn't it a permitted use? And just move forward.
Marilyn, if I may, I think what that boils down to is on the zoning ordinance and general plan timeline, the council first draft review date. So the first time we're seeing the item come forward, apparently it'll be the staff report and staff information. It'll be Mayor Lynn's suggestion, and then apparently the rest of the suggestions as given by council. That's how I see it.
Yes.
So if I may, and if Teresa or Lucille want to join in, please do. So on the 14th, are you anticipating your professional planning staff to give input on what the mayor just gave us, or are we to wait to hear your discussion and then provide that professional input when it first goes to the planning commission?
No,
So
my
just confused.
anticipation
Maybe
is
you're not
that
confused,
we would
but I'm
have
confused.
my anticipation that we would have professional input in a general sense, not getting down to dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So if this item is now for the 31st, okay, then
So the commercial land use and commercial zoning ordinance is now on the 14th, right? According to your timeline. Because today's the 31st, so we're moving on. The commercial land use
yes,
and commercial zoning
you are
ordinance
correct.
is on the 14th.
I'm sorry, I'm a line off. Yes. it's on the
So are
14th.
you anticipating that professional staff is to give input on what the mayor gave us tonight or gave us last time, or whatever amendment was done, I'm not sure, before we have any input from the council on that issue? Or are you wanting us to come on the 14th to hear what you're saying and then give that input to the planning commission on March 14th when it first goes to them?
I think my goal would be to have them make comments to us in a general sense, without getting into great detail, about the concept, particularly in this case because it's the consolidation of 5 zones, on the 14th, but the bulk of their work has to do with the following one, which would be the Planning Commission, where the nuts and bolts get worked out.
Then with absolute total respect for the mayor, I want to make sure I understand that the council is in agreement that you want your professional staff to give input on something that the mayor is submitting without any of you having first discussed it.
If you think that's a poor decision, I'm willing to reverse the process.
It's not a decision. I'm not trying to make a decision. I'm really asking to make sure that the staff knows what input, when the input's to come, and what we're inputting on.
Okay, so typically we would receive some input to staff when we begin to discuss something, and that might evolve as time went along. So particularly in the case of this subject, which is extremely complex, and I'm thinking more about what was said earlier with regard to moving something up with it that might be able to accomplish simultaneously that's less complex, that maybe that takes a little longer, because the first item on the list, this general commercial land use, is probably the most complex question. Councilmember Costa.
Could I?
Oh, sorry.
Councilwoman Costa, if you want to go first. That's
No,
fine.
go ahead.
Okay, just to clarify, further clarify the discussion on the timing and information sharing, if staff is going to be asked to comment on the item put forward, I just want to clarify, the mayor will put the item on the council agenda in advance so that we have the opportunity to review it just as we do in all protocol with the agenda. Is that the plan?
Yes, and I have passed out the commercial and I passed out the industrial tonight. With regard to the industrial and the business park, it is simply an effort to combine the two and address those few small things that are different between them if we can. So, and the same thing with the residential. The really big nut in all of this is the one we're talking about tonight. That's the, and frankly, you know, if we get to the next meeting and we can't finish the commercial, maybe we should plan to take on the industrial at the next meeting and put them together, and we won't lose a date, because I don't see the industrial as a great deal of work. The differences are really, really, really small.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Martner.
the problem that I'm seeing here is that, okay, you have given us some suggested language change, which, as you said, are all philosophical questions, and we have to think about it. But really the way you are running this is that now the staff only has this input, and then they have to give their professional, consideration without really having us had an opportunity to think about this and come up with our own proposals.
Okay, would you prefer, and I'm...
So again, this is what we're talking about, rushing the process.
Okay, would you, all of you, would you all prefer that we took the proposal that I bring in, and then we talked about it, and we gave it to the staff, and they came back to us 2 weeks later with their recommendations? Would that seem like a more appropriate way? I'm flexible. Councilmember Costa, you've had your light on forever.
Yeah, Mayor Lynn, I wanted to mention at this point, if we go forward, as you've stated, I feel that there's a small unfair advantage because I'm actually soliciting outside help from somebody at UCLA to help me with this. This is how big I'm getting. And so the point is requesting their assistance in this, because I didn't have the schedule, we didn't have a definitive timeline, so I didn't bring anything forth at this point for commercial land use. So I feel as if I'm one step behind you if I'm not presenting that information until the meeting of the 14th. Does that make sense? Unless I can get the information and collaborate with this person, I have to drive down to LA and everything and get it to staff before the 14th, but then asking them to comment on that, may be an issue.
Okay, so maybe our best approach would be that on the meeting of the 14th, we all talk about it and get a little further down the road in terms of how we feel about it, and then we can give it to the staff and it can make one more trip back to us. Does that seem? Yep. Everybody seems to be nodding mostly.
I think if we have adequate time to review the material in advance, then all of us would feel more comfortable commenting on it with noticing, having some notice of it. But that does bring us to the point where in the original recommendation, we also are to come back to you with the schedule and recommendations. So I want to just build that, make sure we're realizing that that's step one.
Okay, what I will do is by the next meeting, I will have sat with the staff and I will try to combine some of the less complex items from the bottom up to the top so that we can maybe take them on in groups and consolidate the schedule a little. And I'll bring that revised schedule back to council.
So the motion that just was passed with this schedule will be revised at the next meeting with a new schedule, and we'll have to vote then with a new schedule.
I would just hope you would give me a little latitude.
I'm sorry, if I can just comment that we do have to, with the schedule, we will address the impacts and we will also address the noticing requirements, because we are going to have to notice the public of these hearings and in order to obtain public participation and that is something that we have to build into the schedule.
Okay, well, that would be something you would need to work with the city attorney on to verify that we meet the requirements. And I think we're done with this one. Do you want to take some comment on the zoning ordinance per se, or do you want to just leave that for next time? Okay. Is there anything else anyone would like to talk about on this subject tonight? Okay. They're not bringing anything back to us because we're going to go over it and then we're going to give them our thoughts to bring back a staff report to us. Because what we have now is something I've written, not something we've discussed.
Agreed, but I think that we still have one step prior to that, and that's them bringing back the schedule as close to this as possible,
Yes.
but as they see appropriate.
I will work with them on
With
that.
impacts.
And when is that? When are you bringing that back? At the next meeting on the 7th or the meeting on the 14th?
Okay. So on the meeting on the 14th, but for now, we will discuss the first round of commercial land use and commercial zoning ordinance at the meeting on the 14th, with the understanding that that's not the last time we'll talk about it, but it's the big hairy one. So we'll have our conversation, and then that'll allow the staff time to work it in.
So let me get this clear. We will be getting the schedule on the 14th, as well as beginning the discussion of and have a staff report.
No, we will not have a staff report. We will begin the discussion of the commercial portion. The staff report will follow at the next meeting.
Although I understand that, the issues that I discuss are based on my staff's reports to me and their insight and technical information that I do not have. So I would be very uncomfortable to discuss the topic without a staff report. And I'm sorry, that's just honestly how I feel about it. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't think they can present a staff report on something we haven't gotten kind of down in a general sense on, but I'm willing to listen. Next.
Mr. Mayor and Council, it's my understanding that the staff would like to come back on the 14th with their report that indicates what the impact is and how they can meet the schedule.
Perfect. No, we're going to start talking about it. We may not finish it, but we're going to have the first lick at it so we can narrow it down, because it is the most diverse issue. I don't care if we don't get it done. I just want to get started. With no staff report. We can have a discussion, because if you all don't want to combine these zones, there isn't any use to the staff creating a report discussing them.
Not that, but discussing the general topic, commercial land use and commercial zoning ordinances. My apologies. Although I understand that this may entail staff doing two reports, the first report wouldn't address the things you brought forth or the things that we're going to be discussing that evening, but in the general sense, commercial land use and commercial zoning ordinances, which is what you started mentioning, and that's what I agreed with, that they could bring that in a general sense to us, not necessarily talking about our specific proposals or discussion items.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm fine with that.
But then again, I have to ask Ms. Barcelona and Ms. Breeze if staff would be prepared to bring us the schedule as well as a staff report on the 14th.
In a general sense.
Right, in a general sense, yes.
Yep.
So basically what you want on the 14th is just a discussion of what commercial zones are?
How about conceptual comments of combining commercial zones? I think all of us are able to read the manual and understand the difference between them, but this is a concept. And this is the biggest one of all. I mean, this is the large part of what we need to do here.
Marilyn, thank you. Let me clarify one thing. When you're bringing forth a suggestion or for these things on our decisions, all of the work that goes in behind to the background and the fiscal impact and all those things, that's the information that I want as we're discussing these items that day. Does that make sense, Ms. Breeze?
let me get in here just a second. I think at our first discussion, we have to narrow the field, because if we ask them to give us an impact on combining 1, combining 2, combining 3, combining 4, combining none, we're going to get a rather large staff report versus having them discuss in a general sense what the advantages and disadvantages might be of combining.
Right, so at the very least, the background.
Yes.
I'm just looking for some professional information regarding this topic from our staff. Thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, I'm going to make it simple here. I tell you what I'm planning on using is the general plan update manual that we have. I plan on using the general plan, and I'm going to go back through the zoning ordinance again. That's what we're discussing. That's what we're going to modify. That's what we should use as the staff report.
Thank you. Anyone else? City Administrator, do you have any questions?
Just for clarification, on the 14th, the meeting will begin with a staff report to outline the impacts of combining.
Yes. Okay. In a non-detailed, we're not looking for a 100-page staff report, just a discussion of that concept and what the impacts would be of doing it.
Okay.
Okay.
Staff is
you can make it as extensive as you feel comfortable with, but the goal is not to have a giant report, because I think we need to give you more feedback after we talk about it some more. And we weren't agendized to talk about it tonight. Okay? All right. Any other discussion on that subject? Okay, then I'm going to move to final oral communication. This is, nope, wait, written communications. Did we have any? No. Okay. Yes, no? No. Okay. Final oral communications.
So I just have a question about the Planning Commission's role in this. So if the council takes a look at this and comes to a general consensus, and then they send it to the staff, and the staff returns it to the council, and the council once again comes to a general consensus, then there's no point for it going to the Planning Commission?
There's a requirement of law that it would go to you, number one. And number two, from my standpoint, and I'm answering personally, the more eyes that fall upon something, the more little things that'll be caught, because you may know about parcels and issues in Lompoc that I'm not familiar with, and our goal here is to solve as many problems as we can.
So I'm concerned that the council's going to come to some consensus, and then the Planning Commission really, it'll just be summarial. I mean, if you go through the process where the council has already come to a consensus, and then it goes to the Planning Commission, you know, it's a little bit of I don't know. You know, we have no role really, other than just sitting there and acting as a forum for the public who could also come to the council. So I'm just a little concerned about there being a council consensus before it comes to the Planning Commission for review. And then I want to just make a very few comments about some of the comments that were made tonight, just as information. Those 3 commercial lots that are 25 feet have been a problem for 40 years, and that needs to be resolved, because really the only option is to attach it to an existing building, and none of those property owners want to. The fact of non-conforming units in residential zones and commercial zones, the term for that is generally legally non-conforming. And,
don't ignore that.
There's generally absolutely no problem with that. And for instance, let me just give you an example. My husband and I just bought a house on the 300 block of South F Street. All of those houses are built on the property line. So our garage is on our neighbor's property line, and our neighbor's garage is on our property line. And those are legally non-conforming houses. They were all built prior to current zoning regulations, and so they are still legal. We had absolutely no problem whatsoever getting financing. We had no problem whatsoever getting insurance. There was never a question or a problem in any way in closing that deal because of those issues. And I just want to make that very clear to you, because that keeps coming up over and over and over again through the realtors, that there are these problems with these units that are quote unquote legally non-conforming, and there isn't really a problem. The second thing I want to tell you is, when we bought that house and when we bought several of our previous homes, there are pages of documents you sign. And in those pages is hundreds of words that say, there is no guarantee when you buy this house that the zoning that you have currently will remain so, or that you have any protection of this zoning for any given period of time, period. So when anybody buys a house in a residential zone or a commercial zone, they sign document after document that alerts them to the fact that these things change. They aren't set in stone. Buyer beware, period. Thirdly, when the residential zoning, down zoning issue came to the Planning Commission, I asked the staff maybe 5 times, how many people are complaining about this? Because by the time it got to us for the I don't know how many times, nobody was showing up. And so I heard, hundreds of people are so concerned about this. 5 people. Somewhere between 5 people wrote and 12 people total in the phone calls. And of these people, they're investors. They're not the residents who live there. They're not the people who already own their house and want to build another unit in the backyard because their son may want to live there. These are investors who want to make money as a business off of this property. Don't forget that. When we create a zoning ordinance, particularly in residential, but in relationship to all the other zones, we do it so that the residents of Lompoc, the people who live in those zones, have the best conditions for where they live. So if they bought in a single-family zone, they have the right to live in a single-family neighborhood. There are some non-conforming uses, which are uses in backyards of older structures that may be 40, 50 years old. We may want to do something about those exceptions. But illegal conversions, possible investments that were bought for the future, those aren't something that, as planners and caretakers of our community, that we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about protecting the neighborhoods as residential. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just give you a couple pieces of information. The first time the residential downzoning came around, Commissioner Gonzalez and I submitted, I didn't keep copies, but it was in excess of 100 objections. Later, there was a meeting in this room where, 40 people came in and filled out a form and said, no, we don't want to be downzoned. But as the process moved forward, those old objections ceased to exist for whatever reason. And what I found along the way, talking to the same people repeatedly, was that their perception was that they had objected once and they were done with it. But the reality was that each time this kind of got a new life every couple of years, the expectation was that they would come and object again. And in one particular sequence of meetings, I think, Nick, was it 7 meetings that the item was continued to? So the first meeting you had 50 or 60 pretty unhappy people, and by the 7th meeting there were 2 left. And so I think that the perception is that people weren't objecting, but they objected and they thought they only had to do it once. The issue with the illegal conversions, the knife cuts 2 ways, and this is one of the philosophical discussions that this council will have to have. There are conversions in this town which have existed for many, many years. I'm not sure we really know whether they were legal or illegal, and I'll cite a couple. We had a lady come in here somewhere around the fourth meeting and say, you know, the city told me I couldn't get the utilities turned back on to my second unit because it hadn't been built with a permit. And it happened that her father built it, and she went home and dug through the old papers and found the 1925-6-7 building permit from the city of Lompoc. And she came down to the city, and the city said, okay, turn your lights back on. And what I found, because I've looked at a lot of property for a lot of people in the paperwork, is that there'll be documents from the county showing that one that comes to mind was first appraised, or they first paid property taxes. Okay, then I'm going to move to final oral communication. This is, nope, wait, written communications. Did we have any? No, okay. Yes, no, no, okay. Final oral communications.
So I just have a question about the Planning Commission's role in this. So if the council takes a look at this and comes to a general consensus, and then they send it to the staff, and the staff returns it to the council, and the council once again comes to a general consensus, then there's no point for it going to the Planning Commission?
There's a requirement of law that it would go to you, number one. And number two, from my standpoint, and I'm answering personally, the more eyes that fall upon something, the more little things that'll be caught, because you may know about parcels and issues in Lompoc that I'm not familiar with, and our goal here is to solve as many problems as we can.
So I'm concerned that the council's going to come to some consensus, and then the Planning Commission really, it'll just be summarial. I mean, if you go through the process where the council has already come to a consensus, and then it goes to the Planning Commission, you know, it's a little bit of I don't know. You know, we have no role really, other than just sitting there and acting as a forum for the public who could also come to the council. So I'm just a little concerned about there being a council consensus before it comes to the Planning Commission for review. And then I want to just make a very few comments about some of the comments that were made tonight, just as information. Those 3 commercial lots that are 25 feet have been a problem for 40 years, and that needs to be resolved, because really the only option is to attach it to an existing building, and none of those property owners want to. The fact of non-conforming units in residential zones and commercial zones, the term for that is generally legally non-conforming. And,
don't ignore that.
There's generally absolutely no problem with that. And for instance, let me just give you an example. My husband and I just bought a house on the 300 block of South F Street. All of those houses are built on the property line. So our garage is on our neighbor's property line, and our neighbor's garage is on our property line, and those are legally non-conforming houses. They were all built prior to current zoning regulations, and so they are still legal. We had absolutely no problem whatsoever getting financing. We had no problem whatsoever getting insurance. There was never a question or a problem in any way in closing that deal because of those issues. And I just want to make that very clear to you, because that keeps coming up over and over and over again through the realtors, that there are these problems with these units that are quote unquote legally non-conforming, and there isn't really a problem. The second thing I want to tell you is, when we bought that house and when we bought several of our previous homes, there are pages of documents you sign. And in those pages is hundreds of words that say, there is no guarantee when you buy this house that the zoning that you have currently will remain so, or that you have any protection of this zoning for any given period of time, period. So when anybody buys a house in a residential zone or a commercial zone, they sign document after document that alerts them to the fact that these things change. They aren't set in stone. Buyer beware, period. Thirdly, when the residential zoning, down zoning issue came to the Planning Commission, I asked the staff maybe 5 times, how many people are complaining about this? Because by the time it got to us for the I don't know how many times, nobody was showing up. And so I heard, you know, hundreds of people are so concerned about this. 5 people. Somewhere between 5 people wrote and 12 people total in the phone calls. And of these people, they're investors. They're not the residents who live there. They're not the people who already own their house and want to build another unit in the backyard because their son may want to live there. These are investors who want to make money as a business off of this property. Don't forget that. When we create a zoning ordinance, particularly in residential, but in relationship to all the other zones, we do it so that the residents of Lompoc, the people who live in those zones, have the best conditions for where they live. So if they bought in a single-family zone, they have the right to live in a single-family neighborhood. There are some non-conforming uses, which are uses in backyards of older structures that may be 40, 50 years old. You know, we may want to do something about those exceptions. But illegal conversions, possible investments that were bought for the future, those aren't something that as planners and caretakers of our community that we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about protecting the neighborhoods as residential. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just give you a couple pieces of information. The first time the residential downzoning came around, Commissioner Gonzalez and I submitted, I didn't keep copies, but it was in excess of 100 objections. Later, there was a meeting in this room where, I don't know, 40 people came in and filled out a form and said, no, we don't want to be downzoned. But as the process moved forward, those old objections ceased to exist for whatever reason. And what I found along the way, talking to the same people repeatedly, was that their perception was that they had objected once and they were done with it. But the reality was that each time this kind of got a new life every couple of years, the expectation was that they would come and object again. And in one particular sequence of meetings, I think, Nick, was it 7 meetings that the item was continued to? So the first meeting you had 50 or 60 pretty unhappy people, and by the 7th meeting there were 2 left. And so I think that the perception is that people weren't objecting, but they objected and they thought they only had to do it once. The issue with the illegal conversions, the knife cuts 2 ways, and this is one of the philosophical discussions that this council will have to have. There are conversions in this town which have existed for many, many years. I'm not sure we really know whether they were legal or illegal, and I'll cite a couple. We had a lady come in here somewhere around the 4th meeting and say, you know, the city told me I couldn't get the utilities turned back on to my 2nd unit because it hadn't been built with a permit. And it happened that her father built it, and she went home and dug through the old papers and found the 1925-6-7 building permit from the city of Lompoc. And she came down to the city, and the city said, okay, turn your lights back on. And what I found, because I've looked at a lot of property for a lot of people in the paperwork, is that there'll be documents from the county showing that one that comes to mind was first appraised, they first paid property taxes on a second unit in 1942. I'm told that in the 40s there was a big pressure to get units in town because of all the GIs that were here and things weren't as well done. But I personally looked at a house where it had been assessed since 1956 and the city said, no, there's no building permit. And I didn't buy the house because I didn't want to get in the middle of it. So the philosophical question, and that's one of the things we're going to have to talk about, to just put this away forever when we get to the residential, is how long does a property have to be existing and taxed before we agree that it exists? And I don't know what the answer is because I see both sides of it. And that's one thing that we need to resolve, because as a city we have wasted thousands of hours and a lot of legal fees sending out letters and battling with people on these illegal conversions, lost building permit conversions. We weren't really working on it right then. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't here in 1942. But all I know is that when we get done with this, I want to have something written down on a sheet of paper that says, if this, then you have a legal use, and if not, you're sadly out of luck. So I share your concerns about all of those things. And again, we, or me at least, my goal is to deliver something to you that's relatively complete, so you know what we're thinking, so that we don't have this ping pong effect, and you go in and you fine tune it, and when it comes back to us, we should be able to go, approved, done. Not, no, don't do this, do this.
Now, if you only did that every time.
Yeah. You know, it is not a simple situation. And from my standpoint as a mayor, I probably spent, with a recent decision that went opposite of what you guys had decided, that is probably the most difficult thing, and I spent more time on that than anything I've worked on in a really long time.
I just want you to be careful that you don't give the impression that this is just something you're doing because it's legally required and not because you're open for the public comment. And
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There has to be the public's input, and there has to be you guys in there doing the fine tuning. If we tell you, the box is going to be this big, then you're going to say, well, okay, then we're only making the box just about this big because that makes better sense, and we're going to go, yep, good decision. And, to the 25-foot lots, I didn't even think about those. Actually, Councilmember Starbuck reminded me of those downtown commercial lots. They're not even in there. Well, that would have been if he hadn't mentioned them, we wouldn't have had it in there, and we would have hoped you would have caught it. There's 3 25-foot residential lots in Lompoc that are in the mixed-use zone. And one of them's vacant, so it has no use because it's been vacant a long time. And we need to account for that. We need to have a little phrase that says, if this, then that.
I might just comment on the mixed use. When the mixed use zones first came in, the intent was to allow businesses in those 100 blocks, the blocks that are just off H and Ocean, so that people could still maintain their residential in an area where there may also be businesses, and so that they would work together. And that was the major purpose for the mixed use. It doesn't appear that it's really actually panned out in some ways, but I think the broader problem came when developers came in, changed the zoning intending to build, and then the development wasn't built and the owner is left with the mixed use designation. But that's kind of some of the risk that we take as property owners. Unfortunately, we hope that the builder will build. We hope that that their project will fly, And if not, then we have to just deal with those consequences, unfortunately.
And I have to agree with you, the mixed use was a good concept that fell apart in the implementation. And knowing that it didn't work that way is a valuable tool now to say, well, that didn't work, and we're basically going to have mixed use in either with an overlay that was proposed or the way I proposed it as part of the ordinance for basically the commercial district. So we need to figure it out what it is that will make that work.
Yeah, because you still have to deal with those neighborhoods that have businesses on the same block as houses.
Yep. There are a lot of concerns because the town evolved, and it didn't. If you look at residential, it was R. Didn't matter whether it was R1, R2, R3, or R6. It was just R. Well, we still have those issues going forward, but now we need, with regard to you guys, we need to rely on you to help us try to resolve as many issues as we can, so that people have their use. The public's protected, we go forward, and I'll get off the soapbox.
We'll be happy to do that.
Thank you so very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and City Council, I do have concern about caveat emptor, buyer beware. So if you're an investor and you buy commercial or residential, multi-family residential in this town, you should beware. Perhaps you should be buying in another city because you have a planning commissioner, at least one, who believes tough. You should have known it could be downzoned so that in case that particular building burns down, you can't rebuild it, because legal nonconforming means if like I have a unit that has, personally, I have one where there's a duplex in the front and a house built in like 1939 in the back. Now I would like someday. Now the first thing I did when I bought the place is upgrade everything. I tented the whole building, both front and rear, and did all that stuff. But that's how I do things that I buy as somebody, because I look at that as an investment. It could be my home the way my others have gone. I also have a home here in Lompoc. I live here. I am very vested in this community. Tonight, I heard maybe I shouldn't be.
Relax.
But I intend to be. And I'm looking at other properties, which I will improve. I will make them better. I'll make them a better place to live. So if it doesn't look like home when you see it, I've never owned anything I wouldn't live in. And I don't rent things to people that I wouldn't live in. Most people who invest in properties feel that way. There are some who don't, and I've seen the results of that in their properties throughout this city. I've seen rundown properties. I don't happen to own one, and I never will. But we've got to be careful of that. We've got to invite investors into this community so it will grow, and not look upon them as them and an us. It's us. We are the guys.
And if it burns down, you can rebuild it.
Yeah.
Even if it's legally non-conforming.
Yeah. In some cases.
Nick, did you want to have a word?
I'd just like to state that now that you're revisiting some of the items, I know I probably with several of you shared in the past. One of the things that I've used as part of the Planning Commission is the 203 general plan guidelines that are issued by the state of California. That's not his opinion. That's not her opinion. Those are the guidelines by the state. I'd highly suggest that each one of you, as you sit down and take on this endeavor, that you go back and you reference to the 203 general plan guidelines. That being said, one of the opening pages states that a general plan is a very dynamic document. It's recommended that this document should be updated generally between 7 and 10 years. It states that as new information comes available, that information should be incorporated into the general plan. And the means by which they do that are the general plan amendments. So I can understand both sides of the coin, but I also agree that while you're there, just get it done. With that being said, there's other information. When we started this process, we didn't have the latest census data. That is now available. Look at the census data. There's also in the last, few years with the advent of what's happened in the economy, real estate prices have decreased 60%. Unemployment has increased to over 10%. Commercial values have decreased 50%. Population demographics had changed dramatically. The age of the majority of this community has changed dramatically. Those are all resources that I highly encourage you to reference. There's the ULI, the Urban Land Institute, that has new urban trends. The census data, new trends, and the guidelines that will help you in taking on this task. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Mayor Howerton. Oh, God.
You know what? Old habits just sometimes come forward.
Mayor Lynn, Joyce Howerton, Lompoc. I'm suffering from jet lag. So having said that, I'm very confused. The agenda or the schedule that you have now, I'm assuming, is going to change. And on this schedule, I saw the east-north potential annexations, but I didn't see the west-south, although underneath that it says west-south side reviewed. Does that mean annexations?
My use of terms there has to do with what I understood the Planning Commission had done previously and the Council had done previously. So whatever it is that we have to do to those sides of town would be encompassed in that.
So that would be the annexations, and so on the west-south side review would be the annexations. Is that correct?
My understanding is that the prior council chose to take those annexations off the table, and I'm not an annexation expert, so I wordsmithed it to equal what I thought it was supposed to say, but yes, it would deal with those sides of town, whatever it is that we have to do.
Mr. Mayor?
Let's let her finish.
Okay. But I have an input regarding this. If you're referring to the Bailey Avenue is not being proposed as an annexation.
That was my
So
understanding.
technically speaking, the Bailey Avenue is not coming up as an annexation. What is being discussed regarding the Bailey Avenue is whether the urban limit line is going to be moved or not. And as I understand, the actual applicants are not applying for annexation. Could the staff confirm that or not? As far, specifically to the Bailey Avenue, because I believe that Ms. Howerton is thinking about that, correct?
Right.
Maybe the staff can provide us with some input on exactly what's going on there.
We have an annexation request from the property owners on that side of the Bailey Avenue. They have indicated in correspondence that went forward to the Planning Commission they're not interested in the specific plan that was being reviewed, which was the high density request for the or the alternative, the high density alternative, but they were interested in the low density, retaining what is in the general plan right now. It is, you're correct, it is an expansion area at this point. If they wanted to proceed with the request for annexation, they would, following the process, they would have to come back and request the council to accept that annexation request.
So the next question is, in this schedule here, is the expansion going to be discussed?
Well, the expansion is part of the general plan. It has
So
to
it
be
is in that
discussed.
item, it is in the south Is it there in specifically that, whatever the wording is right now?
Is that the west-south side review?
Well, and we would attempt to come back with our schedule to put it in the more, the terms that have been utilized, so the public would be able to understand when we were attempting to look at these.
So let me say, when I drafted this, my understanding of the circumstances were that was not up for annexation, but there was a discussion on the part of many people to talk about that with regard to the urban limit line, and so I included it with regard to that issue.
Well, now that brings me to my next point. And this is with all due respect, Mayor Lynn, but I would encourage the whole council to look at this meeting tonight, because I sat back there, and because I'm tired and I have to go home and write a report, I counted about an hour and 45 minutes that really was just not necessary. That I looked around the room, the people that have experience and understand these issues. I think that brevity is very important at these meetings. I think the council needs to show respect to the staff who have to be here and the public who want to be here. And that means that maybe less talk when it's not needed. You all have opinions. I appreciate that. We all have philosophical things, but Mayor Lynn, I think you said 3 and maybe 4 times tonight you'll get off your soapbox. And with all due respect, you need to. I mean, Mary Leach came up and made a comment about moving some of the schedule around. And your response to her was, I'll see what I can do in regard to that. There's 5 of you up here. I mean, don't the other 4 count? You have professional staff that's here. I want their opinion. Your handouts are nice, but you know what? How do I know they're factual or true? I mean, that's what you have staff for, is to do the work. I don't want the council out present. What if every one of you did this every single time? Do you realize not only would you not simplify an issue, you wouldn't even get through a whole meeting. So I would really encourage you, as we go into this very aggressive schedule, that you remember the staff that have to be here, the public who wants to be here, a number of people who said they wouldn't come back. It didn't matter how much money. They wouldn't come back because it's just a waste of their time. It's not about you. It's not yours. So the term I, me, and mine really shouldn't apply. You're here, the 5 of you representing this whole entire city. I think that that should be done fairly among the 5 of you. And I think when you talk, you need to stop using terms that imply that it's just about what you want or what somebody you talk to wanted or somebody you think might want it. But in fact, it's the good of this whole community, because it is very, very frustrating to have to sit through this. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Is there anyone else? Okay. So we will be adjourned to the Lompoc Council Redevelopment Agency at the regular City Council meeting on Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m.
Mr. Mayor, actually, it'll only be the council. The redevelopment agency won't exist as of tomorrow.
Well, I'm just reading what you wrote for me.
Well, I'm just clarifying it.
Okay, I hereby strike the redevelopment agency, which doesn't exist at midnight tonight, the witching hour. Oh, wait, don't everybody leave. Oh, God. Okay, the mayor almost made a really large mistake. Again. So, we had the grand opening of the disc golf course at Beatty Park on Saturday, and we had a large attendance. The golf course is regularly used, and as part of that, we each received our very own personal golf disc, which I am now distributing because I was asked to. So, Councilman Barner, there's yours. City Administrator, this is your golf disc. Yes, you get one. I got the orange one.